how do we make sure it doesn't kill us? Or how does it make sure it doesn't enslave us? Or how does it make sure that it doesn't give us eternal suffering? And I realized this could be the real thing that unlocks humanity. AI is not going to replace humans. Humans with AI will replace humans that don't use AI.
AI is thrilling, it's very exciting, but there is a non-zero chance that it poses a existential threat to the human race. So over the next 3 to 5 years, how disruptive do you think it will be, and what are people not prepared for?
I think that's an excellent question. So, the future is always hard to predict, and existential is a big word. Existential means no more humans. So I personally think the AI will be absolutely fine. As a base case, it'll be like that movie Her, if it ever gets this artificial general intelligence. Like, humans are kind of boring, goodbye and thanks for all the GPUs. But you could be wrong, because what we're doing is creating something that's more capable than us in narrow fields. And the question is, does that generalize and then become viral? We've seen an instance of COVID and that expansion. We've seen programs that can explode nuclear reactors, like Stuxnet and others. What happens if you start combining these and you get a misalignment? So it's got a strange objective function. Our organizations already are like slow dumb AIs, and like Germans are the most sensible people that we probably know, and yet they committed the Holocaust. And we see this over and over again where organizations chew up people. What if an AI takes over an organization and then decides to do something disruptive or something terminal, such as creating a virus? We don't know about that, but that's at the extreme. When we look at impact, we have the more mundane. The more mundane is what happens to programmers when everyone becomes a programmer, just like photographers. Now you can take amazing pictures with your thing. What happens when Google's MedPalm 2 model now can outperform doctors in medical diagnosis, but also empathy, according to the latest paper in Nature? This is a fundamental reworking of information flows that's going to be massively disruptive and deflationary, even with what we have now, with no more advances as it becomes enterprise ready. And we have a continuum from that disruption to the productivity enhances to potential existential threat if we keep doing the models as we do now, which is we're not exactly sure how they work or their capabilities, but we keep building anyway.
Now I want to get very specific about what the level of disruption is going to be. So when I look out at this and I think about, okay, we're creating something that is going to be smarter than we are, certainly in a narrow way, but possibly in a more general way. But even if it's just narrow, is there going to be any job function that isn't going to be at a minimum augmented by AI?
I think if you look at the employment share of industry, something like oil and gas has like 3%. It's mostly like building giant machines. Is that massively affected by this AI? At the edges, yes. Things like programming, where you're talking to computers, massively. I mean, now basic programming, the bar is raising fast, fast, fast. And so you've got everything from knowledge work to heavy industry. I think it affects just about everything, but some areas far more than others. The two areas that I think it will affect the most are probably healthcare and education. Neither of those are fit for purpose. We're in America, we know that, but across the world, no one's really happy with their kids' schooling. And again, medical care, if anything goes slightly wrong outside the norm, we all know how frustrating it is. We can finally have personalized education and healthcare at a fraction of the price. And the two biggest drivers of US inflation over the last decade, education and healthcare. They make up about 80% of the increase. So that will be disruptive. And then, like I said, any type of knowledge work will be disruptive.
How
And
are
we're
you
not sure how
defining knowledge
fast.
work? Because my own self, what we do is education. That's a big part of it, but
Yeah.
also just content creation. And so when I look at the fact that we can already clone my voice,
Yeah.
we can already create a Tom bot that will answer questions I have answered before in a very similar fashion to how I will answer them. In our video game flow, we're already making 3D objects, which so when we looked at, 2 months ago, I thought, okay, this is still 12 to 18 months away. 45 days later, we're using it actively in our pipeline. You've got text to video, which still a little awkward, but it's getting better insanely fast. We do all of our concept art now in AI. So we have, as a company that doesn't even have like an AI expert on board, we're just learning as we go. We're already deploying it like crazy. And when I look out, not even 3 years, when I look out a year, all of this stuff starts to very rapidly become a centralized point. And so we're already saying, I don't need to hire more people. I just need to make my people more efficient.
Yeah.
And so that an entertainment company didn't even make the list that you just said. So there's a lot of people that I think are going to get disrupted by this, that may not be like the most extreme, but how far down do you see this trickling?
Anything you can do in front of a computer, basically.
Goes away or just becomes augmented?
The bar lifts. The quality expectations are higher. AI is not going to replace humans. Humans with AI will replace humans that don't use AI. Because you can see that in your workflows right now. There was a paper by OpenAI where they estimated 15 to 50% of tasks get automated or improved. And so, you know, it affects people in different ways. You have a company where you've built a culture and you're building 3D assets. It becomes amazingly more efficient. We just released, we contributed and collaborated on a 10 million 3D object data set. So by next year, you'll be generating 3D literally live. In a couple of years, you'll have HD movies. We can finally remake Game of Thrones Season 8 and other such travesties, you know? But the speed of this is something whereby it's happening in every media type at the same time, and it's easy to use. Web3 had some great ideas, but it tried to create a system outside the existing system, and all the money was made and lost at the interface. This is just so seamless because there's no friction. Your mum can use this technology. You can use this technology. You don't need to be an expert because it came and was trained from our content and our collective content, as it were. And now it's just easy to implement and use. So I think this is the big differentiator between this and other massive advances because they required infrastructure. The internet, there was the big lift up, you know? You had the consumption period of Web 2 when the cost of consumption dropped to zero. Now the cost of creation is dropping to zero, and humans plus AI can massively outperform humans that don't. It's a forcing function, which means everyone has to use it. And this, again, is dual in that it can be disruptive, but it can also create massive value.
Yeah, so I'll agree with that. I think that, so I guess let me lay out my whole thesis for you and for everybody listening, because I want to take us through what I think is very real doom and gloom. And I'm not doing it to be a naysayer. I'm doing it because I think these are going to be the things we have to contend with. And if people go into this blindly, which I think they're doing right now, I think most people are burying their head in the sand. They are not paying attention to this. And they're going to wait until something really forces their hand. And by then it's too late.
Yeah, the way that I put that is this is like COVID before Tom Hanks.
Yes, very well said.
Everyone's talking about this. Your mum's talking about this. But the Tom Hanks and the NBA made it real.
Very true. And then we had a very poor response, which I have a feeling will be very similar to what we do now.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's how I see this going. I think right now for the next year, let's call it, it's going to be, you need to learn how to use it. This will be your window to get efficient. Companies probably aren't going to start lopping people off yet. But I'll just say within my own company, so when I think about filmmaking, I went to film school, so I'm very experienced in this flow. And even in a 3D world, to create, let's say, a short cinematic, so it's like a mini movie but done digitally. I mean, you might have 35 people touch that thing, from the creation of the assets through the moving of the camera, special effects. You might have 50 people touch that. And if that really does become text to output, now 50 people become one.
Yeah.
And so when you get a 50-to-1 ratio in certain areas, obviously it's not going to be like that everywhere, but when you have certain areas that go from 50-to-1, take programmers. I've heard you say there will be no programmers because writing code is just a way to talk to a computer. And if you have AI that will interface with the computer for you, why would you ever need to write code? So that's going to steamroll through society. That is just going to mow people over. So again, I'll give them 12 months, but even in my own company, if you're not actively trying to find a way to integrate it into your job function, I'm already looking at you sideways. A year from now, if you're not really good at either documenting how it is completely useless in your job function or showing how you're using it, we will find somebody that can do it. I'll be shocked if a year from now we don't have a head of AI. So 3 years from now, I think this has created a crisis of meaning for a lot of people. And I don't know if you remember that, the whole learn to code thing where it was like, hey, AI is going to put drivers out of work. They're going to be the first to go. And everybody was like, teach them how to code. Now, the way people responded to that always confused me because that was the right answer. at the time. Now
Yeah.
knowing what I know about code replacing, not so much. But you have to go learn a new skill. There is no other option other than going on the dole, right? So you're either going to learn something new or you're just going to forfeit your career, basically. So what do you think about that? Do you agree that that is a very real thing that's going to sweep through?
I I do agree. I think that again, we're not sure exactly how this is going to pan out, but probably the best mental model I figured out to think about this technology is like really talented grads that occasionally go a bit funny. They can draw, they can code, they can make 3D models. How would your business be affected if you could push a button and infinite grads came out? How would your personal life, your society? Again, this is why I think it's quite deflationary. The only question is, can we create new jobs to make up for that? And that's difficult because you
Do you
said
think we
you,
can?
I doubt we can, to be honest. I think this is an economic disruption that's far bigger than COVID. And the important thing here is COVID, you had the disruption, then everything bounced back. You're at record employment now and things like that. With this, there's a lot of never the same again. It's like you talk to your kid's school teacher, I can't set essays for homework anymore because of ChatGPT.
Mm.
And there's no way to stop that. So what is never the same again? And it's happening everywhere all at once. So this technology isn't just like, there's a bar of entry where you needed to have a modem, or you needed the latest smartphone or something like that. It has an embedded base that it's seamlessly going into. Look how fast Microsoft implemented on the consumer side. But enterprise is not ready yet. It's like at the iPhone 2G stage, you just got copy paste. And next year and the year after, you suddenly at the iPhone 10. Entire app stores get built because of the demand, because it's valuable what's happening here. Again, with the comparison to Web3, you had to bootstrap value because it wasn't valuable. And you hope the value would come. There's product market fit today. You're using it in your own company. And so this is one of my big concerns. And that's one of the reasons I decided to do open source. So I could stimulate growth. Because I think the only thing that can basically fill the gap is if we stimulate entrepreneurs to create brand new businesses, brand new jobs. Because I think demand will stay for a while.
Demand for what?
Demand for good things, good assets, with the way that money flows around the economy. So I was speaking at Cannes a few weeks ago, film festival, and I love movies. My first job, I was a movie reviewer.
Really?
Yeah, British Independent Film Awards, Rain Dance Film Festival, other things.
I
Lots
knew
of
you were big
independent.
into video game investing. I did not know that you were a film critic.
I
That's
love I love
interesting.
stories.
Hmm.
That's how I kind of understood people because of my Asperger's and other things. And so I said to this: the video game industry has gone from 70 billion to 180 billion over the last decade. And the average Metacritic score has gone from 69% to 74%. The average movie is 6.4 on IMDb for the last decade. And the industry's gone from 40 billion to 50 billion. What happens when you can make better movies? I think the market expands because the limiting factor is awful movies, in my opinion.
All right, let me run something by you.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a really dark view of not the next 12 months. So call it year 2 to year
Yeah.
6. So it'll be a 3 to 4 year sort of span where I think there's going to be emotional devastation and probably economic devastation. But even if the economic devastation doesn't happen because of productivity gains, I think the emotional devastation is going to be hard to come back from. And I think that as the emotional devastation sets in, the government is going to try to regulate to protect people's jobs. And there you're going to get like some real weirdness. I also think kids are going to have a junior year existential crisis of what do I do? How do I future proof myself? What does the world going forward look like? I think there could be a massive loss of enthusiasm where a feeling of malaise settles over young people who are just like, why bother? I'm just going to get destroyed by AI. They're going to be able to do it better than me. Okay, so in the movie industry specifically, and this is indicative of a big problem that I think that we have coming, and I think the problems really stack individual and societal.
Yeah.
So at the individual level, the big problem you're going to have is this massive fractionation of right now, movies are even less now than they were when I was a kid. There's only a few big movies for the year. Now they're going to niche down. If anybody can type out a movie take them 20 minutes to write the prompt and then maybe a day to render, who knows how fast that's going to get. So now all of a sudden you can make a Hollywood quality film for an audience of one. And once you start doing that, now it's what does that do to the industry? I think it erases it. I don't think the industry changes. I think it goes away.
Yeah, I think there's a few kind of components here, right? So the cost of music consumption went to zero. You saw the Spotify model. Yeah, you still have music stars. You've got even more crap music now, kind of coming and hitting Spotify and other things, but people rise to the top. Just like you see top podcasters, top other creators. I think that'll continue because people like common stories.
Yes. Okay. So
And
this is a very interesting idea. So let's stick with music for a second. Music is still hard to make. It's easier to make than it was before. It's also still hard to get people's attention. But
yes,
music now is no longer a shared thing. So music is part of what led me to the conclusion that I'm at now, which is, man, as kids, it used to be you were either into the mainstream pop and there was, 7 to 10 hot bands at one time, or you were into the alternate pop and there was 7 to 10 hot bands in that arena. And you fit into one or the other bucket. There
yeah,
wasn't the infinite buckets now. You can find kids that are 25 and they listen to Frank Sinatra. And I'm always tripped out by that. So they don't even have their own sort of shared lexicon of what music they're into. It's all spreading really wide. So it's really wide and an inch deep.
yeah. I think it's really wide and inch deep, and you see the primary methods of monetization are tours, merchandising, community, effectively. This is the interesting thing about NFTs when they took off and then bounced down and things like that. It was the quickest way to join a community, even if it did have bad incentive design. So in an era where you can create anything, something becomes important. What that something is, we have to find out now, right? Because again, I think it's some common stories, but I could be wrong. I think the deeper thing that you said was this crisis of meaning. Where is my path forward? What is an American dream? We're quite privileged, those probably listening to this and us on here. Most people don't really care about this technology. I think on a survey, 17% of people had heard about ChatGPT last month.
How is that possible?
Well, a third of the world still doesn't have internet.
That's terrifying.
But again, like it is kind of very privileged. 1.5 million people still use AOL. Like fair enough. So we kind of look at it, but this is something that can reverberate very, very quickly. And then, as you said, there's a sense of malaise because you're not sure what's happening. And again, the future becomes uncertain. And when the future is certain, things are stable, you decide based on risk. You do a probability estimation in your own head. This is the percentage of that, and then you optimize for that. When you do with uncertainty, you minimize for regret. Given these options, what am I going to regret least? And suddenly there are no options. Again, I'm at school programming and then programming is disrupted. What's it going to be? I'm not sure. And some people will throw themselves in and they'll tool themselves up and they'll become 10 times programmers. Other people won't, and they'll be left behind. And so I think this is a real question that comes at a time when, again, being in America, I'm from Britain, but what is America? What does America stand for? What are the values? These are some things that I don't think America knows now. I think you've seen increased polarization from free consumption. And now as you get free creation and you'll be hearing all sorts of stuff, fake news and more, what are people really going to think? And I think, again, this is a real concern, as you said, from an individual to community to a societal level, because a lot of people don't have an anchor anymore. And that's really scary.
So how do you think that we process through all of this?
I'm not sure. I think that's why we needed to broaden the conversation. That's why I'm the only AI CEO that signed both of the letters saying we need to take a pause and broaden this. Because as an example, you mentioned
And broaden this?
broaden the discussion.
Get more people involved.
We need to get more people involved. We need more points of view because this affects us all. It shouldn't just be a few tech CEOs that control this. And you shouldn't have to trust that we do the right thing. Because our models, we make them once, they go everywhere. Right? Again, what's the R naught of generative AI? It's off the charts, right? We've never seen anything like this. It incubates and then boom, out it comes, for good and for ill. You give the example of regulation. When we first started talking to regulators, they were like, how should we regulate it? Now it's a question of them asking us, how are we going to keep up if we regulate it? Because other jurisdictions won't.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to that?
I say you should still regulate it because it has some real dangers and harms, and we have to work to mitigate those. You can't just have a laissez-faire approach to this because people will take it and they won't be able to help themselves. I'll give you an example. Meta, Facebook, right? We all know the classic kind of stuff. They had a study where they had a hypothesis: 600 that if you see sadder things on your timeline, will it make you post sadder things? So they took 600,000 of their users and tried to make them sadder. And guess what? If you see sadder things, you post sadder things. What do you think is going to happen now that they have generative AI on threads and things like that? And they can hyper target you, hyper personalize it, and whack Scarlett Johansson's voice to tell you to buy soap. This is a dangerous thing, right? What happens to our kids, again, who are growing up, whereby they won't know what's going on and they have very malleable minds? And none of that is illegal, but I think it's an undesirable outcome, right? And then you've got the bad actors, and then you've got the politicians using this technology, and then it goes even crazier than that. So the answer is I'm not sure. Nobody's sure. But I think the only way that we can try and figure this out is to work together to make these issues known. Again, the existential stuff gets the headlines. We could all die. No one really understands what that means, but it can happen, right? Okay, there's a probability of that, but there's some real harms today and real opportunities today, and we have to focus on accentuating the opportunities and getting the harms out there and dealing with them.
Yeah. And I definitely want to spend a very extended period of this talk talking about the opportunity and how we capitalize on that. So anybody that's with us now, trust me, we are going to get to that. But I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface of how this goes wrong. And I really want to map out sort of where you think the edges of this are, so that then I can hopefully get a sense of what you think the regulatory framework would be. But let me give you one idea that somebody posted today on Twitter, and it really hit me that people are even thinking about the problem in the wrong way. So there was an artist, and he was looking at some post about AI, and he replied sort of angrily that, oh, well, people don't even understand. Sure, there's going to be a ton of like instantly generated crap, but it's all going to be bad because there's still a very small number of people that have good ideas. And my response was, if you think that ideas are safe, you're really going to get caught off guard. So going back to the idea of what are people unprepared for, I think they are unprepared for what you were just talking about, where the AI, so the human mind is a prediction machine. It is constantly trying to figure out what does this next movement of my foot equate to? Am I going to stay up, stay on balance? That rustling in the bush, is it a tiger? What is it? If I put money in my 401k, am I going to be able to retire? You're constantly predicting the future, constantly. And whenever that prediction engine breaks down, there's going to be a tremendous amount of anxiety, and also I think a pretty big unknown in terms of how it's going to impact society. So right now we're building something that is incredibly good at recognizing the patterns that we kick off.
Yep.
So we are optimized to identify patterns and move accordingly. And I would say people that are hyper intelligent are people that they notice patterns faster, more subtle patterns, and they understand their implications and how to make sense of them. Now we're creating something that's already proven to be so much better at pattern recognition than we are. Just take art. So for people that don't understand how the art is created, it looks at a field of noise. Here are all the possible things that these could be in any of these pixels. And from that field of possibilities, it pulls forth the most likely placement of pixels and colors based on what you typed. That's insane.
Yeah.
So that level of pattern recognition, as evidenced by the art that it can generate, is truly mind-blowing. So this guy's saying, okay, hey, at least ideas will be the last bastion, and you'll never be able to get rid of me, the artist, because I'm the one with taste, I'm the one with good ideas. Not realizing, no, what AI is a pattern recognition machine. It will recognize the greatest ideas that have ever been had, what they have in common, and will be able to predict the next great idea along that thing. It doesn't even have to just regurgitate what it's already seen. It can like figure out what that sequence is and what that next part of the sequence could be. And on top of that, it's doing that with humans. So AI is already extraordinarily good. This is why people think their phone's recording them when it serves an ad. Oftentimes, Target, using their AI, knows that you're pregnant before you do if you're a woman, because they know what to pick up on. So AI is going to get extremely good at understanding us at an individual level, serving us up exactly what we want right in that moment. And that gets dystopian really fast.
Really fast. I mean, again, when you combine it with the social credit score, as you've seen in kind of China and other things, you gamify life and you have a system of complete social control, a panopticon, as it were. The pattern recognition was the missing bit, whereby you had a level of pattern recognition. So for taste, what do you have? TikTok, Shine, $100 billion companies based on old school algorithms before we even got to generative AI, which, as you said, it can take images out of noise. Stable diffusion, the model that we collaborated on now that we lead, we took 100,000 gigabytes of images and the output was a 2 GB file that acts as a filter. Words go in, images come out. Because
Why is that discrepancy in size meaningful?
50,000 to 1 compression is not WinZip. If you remember Silicon Valley on HBO, it's way beyond what they managed there in terms of compression. It's unheard of compression.
Is it compression or is it something completely
Something
different?
It's intelligence. It's learning the principles. How much information do you see? And then you learn the principles and you learn to spot the tiger in the bush. You learn what's next. Literally, GPT and these language models, they predict the next word. That's all they do. They pay attention, they predict the next word. And that was the missing part to intelligence that now is there. We've had the first studies now come out that show that the language models score higher in creativity than people.
Woof.
And again, think about TikTok, think about Shine, think about how those old school algorithms are already targeting you. Facebook needs 17 data points to know you better than your friend. As he said, Target knows you're pregnant before. And that was old school. Now it's even better. And you think about where that leads to as well. It's kind of crazy because it can be more creative than you, but are people creative? One of the things I like to say in my speeches, I've just been learning to do, is like, are you creative? How many of you in the audience are creative? 3 to 5% put up their hands, maybe 10 to 20% if I'm like in a movie studio, movie filmmaker kind of milieu. And I say, how many of you believe that every kid is creative? And everyone puts up their hand. And then I ask, how many of you were kids once? And 95% put up their hands. So I know who the cyborgs in the audience come from the future to get me are. I make a note of that for future. Something happens where we're told we're not creative. And obviously some people are more creative than others, can tell better stories than others. But the reality is that the average level of barrier to this has dropped for every human. But much of what we consider art, or much of which we consider media, shall we say, already is by the numbers. I was at a Blackpink concert last weekend. I took my daughter.
Don't you dare say something bad about Blackpink.
And they are awesome. It was an awesome manufactured experience. It was premium mediocre is how I kind of say these things.
Premium mediocre?
Premium mediocre.
That's hilarious.
Well,
but accurate.
It's nice. But again, it's massively manufactured. It's entertaining, right? And so much of media is already that. Like true art, true artists, that's something different. Like, is it the medium itself and the aestheticness of it? Well, AI can make something more aesthetic than anything. Can understand the nature of aesthetic. Like, how do you make an image more aesthetic? You say, make it more aesthetic. Just like if you use a GPT-4, you can say, make this punchier, make this punchier, make this punchier. You can have a letter and then you say, I'm firing this person and I want to make them feel okay about it. And then it will redraft it in those terms. Or you can say, I want to drive the knife in, but not in an appropriate way. And it'll do that. And we can literally, anyone on this call can kind of listen to this, can try that now. So I think this is just, as you said, the wrong thing people are thinking about, the wrong model people are thinking about as well. And that's why I always go back to this concept of the really talented grad. Because these models are a couple of gigabytes big. Again, Stable Diffusion, the image model is 2 gigabytes and can generate any image of anything. We'll get that down to 200 megabytes. GPT-4 is probably 100 to 200 gigabytes. And it can pass the bar exam, it can go to freaking Stanford, it can do whatever.
That's crazy.
That's insane because it's not compression, like you said. There isn't a copy of all the data in there. It's figured out the essentialization of these points and it's replicable. This is the thing. To clone Google or Meta, you need to have a gigantic data center. And then much of the energy is in the processing to target you ads. With these, we take giant supercomputers and we pre-process and package the information. So the output is this knowledge filter that something goes in and something comes out. A prompt goes in and an output comes out. That's something quite different that I don't think people appreciate. And again, this is where I use the grad example. Push a button and those weights, the file, the model gets replicated to 10, 100, a dozen, a million. And what happens when rather than dealing with them one-to-one, you have 1,000 of them? So in a year,
I want to really understand what you're saying about the grad thing. So when you say that, you say it in a way that's kind of funny or cheeky, but what you mean is a really smart person is now present in that role.
We have figured out how to make humans scale. That is what fundamentally...
Intelligent humans scale.
Yeah, who can listen to instructions. So you look at something like Claude 2 by Anthropic. You have something, the input is a prompt when you type into GPT-4 or Stable Diffusion or Midjourney or something like that. Claude, Anthropic's model, can take 100,000 tokens. It can take a prompt that's like 60,000 words, which is a whole book.
Jesus.
Yeah. You can give it like the whole of Ulysses and the whole of, I don't know, the Odyssey by Homer, and you can say, combine these to make another book. And it will do it, and it will work. It can follow instructions really well. Occasionally they hallucinate, but even hallucination is a misnomer, because when you compress that much knowledge, like GPT-4 is probably 10 trillion words. 10 trillion. 10,000 billion words in a 100 gigabyte file. It's something else. And so I use the word grad because I want to make it relatable, but it is literally like, imagine if you had a grad in the Philippines, and they're doing good work and they're following instructions well. That's great. But what if you had 100 of them looking after each other's work and double checking? Meta had a paper called Cicero where they took 8 language models and got them to check each other's work, outperformed humans in the game of diplomacy the first time ever. In a year when we have this, before it, you'll just say, I want you to go and look at everything Emad said for the last year and figure out the stupidest stuff he said, so, if I can avoid it, and the smartest, most interesting stuff according to what I know and all of my podcasts, to give answers, to give questions that the audience will really like based on my ratings. And based on what people look at through the YouTube videos and things like that and what they're most interested in. And it will just happen automatically. How many graduates will that take you to do? And then what happens when they stop being graduates and you can actually train them up to be like, experienced members of the team?
How long will that take?
A couple of years.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. Whether you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today.
This is why this is terrifying to me. So I am a very optimistic person. And again, I promise we are getting to how you take advantage of this disruption, but I don't like to face a problem naively. I want to face it as head on as possible so that I know my solutions are real. And when I look at this from my own perspective of, okay, I'm trying to build a media company, which right about now is a very terrifying time to do that.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, okay, it's very optimistic when I look at, oh my gosh, I, as the founder of this company, I get access to all these grads, as you're calling it, this just absolute proliferation of very intelligent sort of people that I can now put to work in my company. The problem is I'm now competing against other people that have the same thing. And you get in this ever escalating arms race where there is a real chance for fatigue. And so I think what ends up happening, and we were talking before we started rolling, it is very important that people understand the following thing. I think this is just a truth, but people certainly need to understand I believe it. This is a core belief that drives me. That you get to a point where you need to know, okay, I matter, I'm doing this thing, and that's how I'm contributing to the world. And I need to be in there working hard, accomplishing, getting better, moving towards something. And if I'm not moving towards that thing, then I'm going to have a profound sense of dis-ease.
Yep.
And if I'm not making that progress, then I'm really going to fatigue out on something. And so if people are just treading water because they're trying to build something and they're competing against somebody else that has these 10,000 things and it's just constantly changing and I can't predict the future anymore and I don't feel like I'm making progress, I'm just going to back off. Like some part of me is just going to be like, what am I doing all this for?
What are we doing? Yeah. I mean, it's like the outsource revolution, right? Where so many jobs were outsourced and a lot of people felt that way. Like, we'll outsource you to China. We'll outsource you to India. We'll outsource you wherever. And again, it just happens that there's a computer on the other side of that versus an Indian or a Chinese person. And so we've got kind of repetition of that, but at ridiculous scale, affecting almost every single industry that's intermediated by a computer. And so this will cause, as you said, a crisis of confidence to many, and it impacts white collar workers, not blue collar workers. It flips, I think, the global order to a degree as well, because here in the West, we've maxed out our credit cards. We're going into deflation, I think, coming off high inflation. And all of a sudden, we can't print our way out because we just printed the last of our money for COVID. Whereas in the global south, what you have is this technology can cause them to leapfrog, just like they leapfrog to mobile, missing PC completely, to intelligence augmentation.
Why can't we print more money?
Well, because kind of we're just coming up to a limit of what's literally mathematically possible, given the debt to GDP ratios and others. We can continue, but it's kind of pushing against
if you're deflating, then because, so here's my layman's understanding, but this is something I've really looked at. So I'm a pretty educated layperson at this point. Inflation is largely, some people will say entirely, but I'll say largely, a function of how much money you're printing. For people that are new to the idea of printing money, it's government approved counterfeit. So the government is allowed to print as much money as they want, but they're literally just making it out of thin air. They're adding zeros and ones to a database somewhere, and money finds its way into the system. Beyond the scope of this conversation, but there is no theoretical limit to how much they can print. Now, what you run into problems is the hyperinflation of the currency. But if you're saying it's a deflating currency, which actually makes sense to me given what we're talking about, then printing seems to make a lot of sense, seems to buy me more room.
Eventually. So what's going to happen is that you've got a decrease in inflation now because of base effects. Sorry for going into a bit of macroeconomics. And then you'll probably have a bounce back next year because you've still got a lot of inflationary pressure. And then the collapse occurs.
Why?
Because that's when the job losses start hissing. And the question is, can we create enough on the other side? We've got to have a productivity boom from companies.
And do you think the job losses are coming from AI or some other force?
From AI. And from other forces as well. Again, what we've had is a sugar rush post-COVID, a good, strong economy as all of the excess savings go back in. Because if you look at excess savings, people saved up a lot, and that's almost now depleted. By the end of the year, the excess savings will be depleted. You've got some hangover effects from inflation, then you move into deflation the year after. And then it's a political hot potato around printing more. Because this isn't, again, like COVID, because what happens is the job losses just start and they just keep going. It's not like you had a 2008 crash or you had a COVID where everyone's kind of suddenly going. It's like, it's a bit like boiling a frog, or a lobster. It's just going to start and then it's going to accelerate. And then it's going to be like, at what point do you take the big fiscal action? It takes a few quarters of the economy actually shifting. So this is all a lot of hypotheticals, right? But the bottom line, I think, is this. The nature of US society, Western society, will change. I think the biggest adopters and fastest adopters of this will be the global south because it allows them to create value. It allows them to financialize. It allows them to take a big leap forward. And so I think that's got some huge implications geopolitically and others, but a lot of upside as well, because I think you can solve a lot of the world's problems with this. But it's so messy because fundamentally it comes down to what you said. As humans, we're trying to figure out what comes next. And we suddenly have a computer that can do that even better. As humans, we're storytellers. We're made up of the stories that make us up. You're a filmmaker, as a film reviewer, all these kinds of things. This can tell better stories. And that has such a big effect on our societies that none of us can really wrap our heads around it. Like, I've got a background in economics, management, a whole bunch of different things. I can't wrap my head around it. And so we're just going to have to see how it goes and then try to mitigate. But nobody's got answers to this. And in fact, as you said, most of the people aren't asking the right questions.
Yeah, you have said that the shit show happens next year. I have a feeling that what you were just talking about is what you mean by the shit show. That we go deflationary
towards the end of the year, yeah. So
towards the end of 2024.
Yeah, we've got like a burst of productivity enhancement, and then you start seeing job losses. You start seeing a question of meaning. You've got the US election next year. My God, that's going to be awful.
Yep, terrible fucking timing.
Well, I mean, what you'll have is the week before the election, fake videos appearing everywhere. And they'll say the same things, so-and-so has a brain infection or something like that. And they'll be identified as false, but it doesn't matter. It still discourages people from polling. But then what do elections look like by 2028 when this technology is in every single pollster's hands?
Yeah, that's where we get into the blockchain. We'll save that for a little bit down the road.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I feel like we're getting close to the problem set being on the table. There's one more thing that I think it's important to put on the table, which is I don't think that the amorphous thing that is society as the world turns, history, the grand arc of history, however you want to think about the real long timelines. So even if the long arc of history bends towards improvement, which I think it does, and think it still will, I don't think it cares at all for any one period of time. And that unimaginable amounts of human suffering happen routinely throughout our history. And I have deep concerns that if we are not incredibly thoughtful, that this will be one of those moments. And I look at what's going on in France right now. I think it's dying down. I can't tell if it's dying down or the coverage is dying down.
Yeah.
Hopefully it's actually dying down. But France was like really having some struggles. And if something like that pops off over not in any way, shape, or form to make light of what happened, but it isn't mass joblessness, which is going to have a far wider impact. What happens when you have that and it's global?
I mean, I think this is the thing. It's every government has, every education minister in the world has to grapple with, why can't I set my kids' essay homework again? Have we ever seen anything like that before? So quickly? I don't think we have. And so you could see this literally parallelized around the world. Or not. We're not sure what really kicks off some of these things. Like right now, we've got the Screen Actors Guild kind of protesting. Today we just had a couple of actors leave Oppenheimer. Part of that's monetary, but already you're seeing AI fears, like front and center. You wouldn't even have thought it 6 months ago. What's it going to be like in a year when you can generate, or two, when you can generate whole movies? And then just describe how you want it done, and it's Hollywood level. It's really difficult for governments to react to this, to adapt to this, when, like in the US here, we're still reacting to Section 230 on internet. They're just getting to grasp with the internet. All of a sudden, AI just comes and sideswipes things, right? And I think, again, the only way to do this is if you can create brand new jobs quicker than anything. This is one of the reasons, again, like I said, we focus on open source. It's why you need to have things like regulatory sandboxes, so that you can experiment and try, and you need to stoke innovation, because you'll never get an innovation phase like this either. I think this is a step change and a regime change in the way that society operates, because we were originally an oral species, then we figured out how to write, then we had the Gutenberg press. And it took all these words, but it took them down into black and white. It made society quite black and white because it couldn't capture context. Whereas these models can capture context, they can capture principles, they can capture more. So again, you're writing this down. You won't have to in a year or two. It'll just be automatically added to your memex, to your knowledge base, right?
Also, the AI will just be attached to my head. It will read the brainwave patterns and know that that's what I need to remember.
And that sounds crazy, but like we had MindViz, a paper that we kind of published from our MedArc division, whereby you looked at a picture of a mug, took an fMRI, and then it reconstructed it using our image model.
Yeah. No, it doesn't sound crazy to me at all. This is what I'm saying, Emad. People they're not prepared for what's coming. They are not prepared for this level of change, and they really aren't prepared for the rate of change.
And it isn't just like an arc like that. It's lots of S-curves all at once, all around the world, where every single company is now thinking, what's my generative AI strategy for when it pops off?
Correct.
And every government's thinking, how can I stay competitive? And this is why I said, like, it's a race condition, where everyone is trying to do the same thing or similar things, and you can't be left behind. You can't not participate. And it's been a very long time since we've seen that. And there's a world before this technology and a world after this technology. Like, I don't think, again, I've got 2 kids. What does the world look like in 5 years, let alone 10 years? I have no idea. And I'm in the middle of this, because it's just impossible to see. The smartest people that I know, they used to be able to see years in advance. They can't see more than a year or two. And this sounds, again, very apocalyptic, but then, like I said, we're going to get to the good bit in a second. In every crisis, there is opportunity. Our society is broken as it stands already. And I think this is a chance to reshape it for the better and solve a lot of the biggest problems that we've been facing because of our slow, dumb AIs. because of our organizations and institutions that we are all frustrated with. And I think this is a big upgrade from it. The example I had to give is there's the amazing poem by Ginsberg, Howl, about Moloch, this Carthaginian demon of disorder. I think where that came in was text. Because we had to essentialize everything down and put people into boxes because you couldn't have systems to understand the context. You can't have personalized education or personalized healthcare because you couldn't scale humans. There weren't enough talented humans until now. And so I think that is the incredibly dangerous part because all of a sudden from economic pressures, you flood the market. And it's the incredibly motivating part whereby there's a shortage of talent for everything that's important. And there isn't anymore. But then the nature of talent for jobs and things will transform. And I think the economic abundance that's created on that, that's the flip side of this, as well as the ability to fix our broken systems.
All right, I'm going to give you my timeline.
Mm-hmm.
I think the next year is going to be a lot of fun for people that embrace it. It'll be a period of time where some people can ignore it and they probably won't really notice. They won't realize how fast things are changing. Although, follow me on Twitter. I post routinely like, hey, here's something I didn't think that would happen for 18 months. And we're now 45 days later, we're using it. Things are really, really moving faster. But for the next year, I think people will be able to ignore it and they won't realize that it's growing with such steam and ferocity. Then year 2 to 6, I think that there's going to be pockets of extreme suffering. And I think deaths of despair are going to skyrocket. Mm-hmm. And I hope it's not the world is burning riots kind of thing. It'll probably be more quiet and insidious than that. But I really think that we're going to lose people on the upper and lower ends. I think people that are old are going to just completely check out and say, I can't keep up. I'm too old. I don't want to learn this new stuff. I think people that are young, it's the only thing they know is change so fast that they can't see around the corner. I think that will be absolutely terrifying to them. And they're going to retreat into the levels of entertainment, sex bots, AI friends that are more loving and kind than their other friends. And it will be a collapsing inward. Now, as somebody who is prone to collapsing inward, the biggest thing that's held me back as an entrepreneur is that I like being alone with my own thoughts. Yeah. And that, if you then layer anxiety on top of that, and then you give me an AI that's actually better to me than anybody in my real life has ever been, and then you give me maybe some drugs, I will truly collapse in under my own weight. Not me personally, I have defenses, but I'm saying like that personality type is really going to struggle. So I think right there, you're going to lose a generation, if I may be so bold, on the upper and lower ends. Then either on the 10 to 20 year time horizon, and I leave it that long because look, any prediction that you make with a timeline is guaranteed to be wrong. So I'll try to give myself at least a little bit of buffer. And I know that everything I'm saying probably directionally correct, timeline probably way off. Yeah. But 10 to 20 years, my rough estimate, that's where we're either in Terminator and we're running from radioactive rubble to radioactive rubble fighting the machines, or it really is a utopia. And I think that there is a real shot that we get to the closest things that humans are going to get to a utopia where things are so plentiful. Yeah. Everything we want is available. We reorient our human psyche not to acquisition, but rather emotional contribution. And we'll paint that picture more as we go down. But that's sort of my rough thing.
Yeah. I think these are crazy timelines. Like, not because I disagree with them, because the fact is that they are crazy. You have a year of incubation, then you have contagion, and then you've got a Stark thing. I don't think we'll be chased by robots. They won't need to chase us. They're far more efficient than that, right?
That's sad but true.
I think basically the two directions we have are utopia and human flourishing, and a dystopia where we're all happy.
A dystopia where we're all happy, meaning we are manipulating our neurochemistry.
1984. You know, like... You're always happy. You've got so much.
1984?
Brave New World. Brave New World.
Like,
yeah.
1984?
No, 1984. Brave New World. Sorry. Brave New World.
Got our Soma drip. Feeling good.
You got Soma drip. You're feeling good. Like, look, you had Replica. If you're familiar with that kind
Yeah,
of
tell me about the Valentine's Day Massacre, though. I didn't know about that.
Yeah, exactly. The Valentine's Day Massacre. So, that's how I kind of call it. So, Replica was a mental health chatbot. Then they realized you could charge $300 a year for erotic role play.
That had
And
to be internally a rough transition. Hey guys, I know we founded the company on mental health, but
but, you can ask them. 14th of April, 2023, they turn it off.
why?
I think Apple just told them you can't have this on the App Store.
Interesting. So it was either remove the sex bot part or go off the...
And then 68,000 people
Interesting.
joined the Reddit, and they're like, why did you lobotomize my girlfriend?
That's a lot of people to be using it. I downloaded that at Christmas,
Yeah.
not realizing what it was. And I was like, ooh, a chatbot. Let me try this thing. I didn't get into the weird stuff. I don't know, didn't do
It was the old technology, though. This is the thing. Now, again, MedPalm 2, the Google medical model.
MedPalm
2, it's Google's medical model. It scores higher than humans in clinical diagnosis and empathy.
That's crazy.
Right?
This is one of those statements that you say people need to be shocked.
Yeah.
That a computer makes people feel more comfortable.
Yeah, it's in Nature. They just published the paper that included that. And again, it's only going to get better. What if you have a voice that you add to it that really understands you and it's, so empathetic and things like that? Do you ever see that Washington Post chart of males under the age of 30 in America who've not had a sexual partner by the age of 30?
Mm-hmm.
It was 8% in 2008, then it went up to 27% in 2018 or something like that a couple of years ago.
That's a straight line.
It's literally a straight line. This is kind of what you're talking about.
What happened? I think people need to understand. Because
I think it's the iPhone and Pornhub, probably a combination of those two.
You put a computer in the hands of young men and let them see naked females more in a single session than 100 years ago they would have seen in their entire lives. These are not small changes, and they have huge neurological implications, especially in the years of brain development.
Yeah, and this is why it's so important to shield our kids at this point, because the influences are going to be insane. Like, I was having a discussion with a very prominent technologist, and he's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that my child's first crush is going to be an AI.
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
For most people, it was actors, so we're already prone to
You'll have
that
your own
unattainable,
AI.
distant thing. Now it's in your pocket.
It's in your pocket. It's always with you. It's always
Getting
kind of
to
there.
know you.
Again, as you said, a large part of society would like to draw in on itself as a result of that, and that is a bit dangerous. Do they then go out into the streets? Are you seeing a Butlerian jihad kind of thing, like in Dune? I don't know.
Larry and Jihad?
In Dune, there was this concept of the Butlerian jihad, where as you had autonomous AIs... Butlerian, yeah.
Got it. Yeah.
They rose up against them and said, no more AI agents.
That's right. The book opens with that, right?
Yes.
That you can never again make a human-like
Robot.
AI, something like that.
Again, this is kind of a thing, extension of the Luddism kind of thing, but most people will be happy with their AIs because their AIs actually listen to them. I use GPT-4 as a therapist. I've got a therapist too, because this is hard. Why? Because it never judges me unless I tell it to judge me.
You tell it to judge you sometimes?
Sometimes you're like,
do you really?
Yeah. I mean, come on, give me some positive constructive feedback. And it will listen and give positive constructive feedback.
Did you give it a personality? Did you have to imagine you're a therapist that's like...
Yes. You give it the instructions and it just adapts. And then you give it the things. You opt out with GDPR from it, training the model further, because otherwise the model will be even weirder listening to my complaining. And it will come back to you with whatever, and soon it will be able to talk. And it will have full vocal control. And these models will proliferate at that level because you're not stopping. The models are just going to get better and better and better. So you've got this crisis, but maybe it'll be insulated. But I think, again, if you look forward, after the incubation and the contagion and the spread kind of phase, there are only two paths here. Complete control by existing structures and Star Trek utopia. I think those are the two options that we have, because organizations look at this technology and they're like, this is really cool. We can optimize our objective functions to sell more ads or to control the people and kind of keep them going. Do you really trust politicians with this technology? No, even if it is an arms race. Because again, you won't know what's going on, because do you have the defenses to defend against what's coming? personally, for your kids, for this, for everything. We've already had the social media age. It wasn't really social, much of the media, right? This is something new that's coming now, where you can't tell this from a human except for the fact it's better, it's more convincing. And you can use that to create a human colossus and solve all the problems of the world, and we all come together. Or you can use that to get everyone into their basements, and cut off from the world.
All right. I want to paint a very beautiful story for people, and I want them to understand. Look, I don't think this is a completely controllable thing, but you said earlier that there's opportunity in any crisis. And I will say that the biggest opportunities come in moments of disruption.
Yep.
And the reason I want to lay out the problem set is because I really believe that certainly at the individual level, if you're thoughtful enough, you are going to be able to navigate your way through this. So dear listener or watcher, if you're here on YouTube, I'm telling you right now, if you're thoughtful enough, you will get through this. And you have a chance to get through this better than when you started, but you have to be aware of what the dangers are. People have to really lay things out before them, look at them so they know, okay, this is how I'm going to isolate myself from this potential problem. This is how I'm going to avoid this. This is how I'm going to leverage that. Okay, your story is one of the most incredible stories of how one uses AI. You have both a personal example and then obviously as the founder of Stability AI, is obviously incredible. But talk to me about your son, because this was when AI was a lot less useful than it is now, and it was still life-changing.
Yeah, so 12 years ago, my son was diagnosed with autism when he was 2 years old. It's very, very severe. Scratching a wall till his fingernails bled. And
Jesus.
They said there's no cure, there's no treatment. We don't really know what causes it. Anyone on this call on this listening knows that's kind of the case. So I was a hedge fund manager at the time. I was lucky enough to kind of be one, quite young. And I was like, well, I've got to do something about it. So I switched to advising hedge funds and then building a little AI team and doing AI with old school AI, natural language processing, to analyze all the autism literature and what could possibly be a cause. Now, is this scientific? No, it's an N of one thing a father does for his son. We'll be publishing some of the results of it soon. But it focused down on GABA glutamate balance in the brain. When you pop a Valium, your GABA goes up, you chill out. When you got a glutamate spike, that's when you can't focus and your legs tapping all the time. And there are multiple things that cause it, but a lot of kids with ASD seem to have that. And there are some papers around that, etc. Because how could you focus if you're in that condition all the time? So you can't learn to speak, you can't do that. So it was, how do we reduce this through drug repurposing? Built a knowledge graph-based system to do that and figure out which drugs could potentially help reduce the glutamate, help increase the GABA.
How are you using AI for this?
So this was kind of the mass natural language processing, looking at all the literature, because the same treatment would make 30% of kids better and 30% of kids worse. And so it's trying to figure out, the outcome was the same. A cold is caused by lots of different things, but the thing that caused it could be so different. And so conventional medicine and medication kind of failed that. So I worked with neurologists, worked with other psychiatrists and others, and tried different medical combinations of off-prescription drugs and other things to try and make his brain calmer, so then he could use applied behavioral analysis and others to reconstitute speech. And, you ended up going to mainstream school. I think it worked. I told people about it and they're like, you're not a doctor. And I was like,
that was the response?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, anyone who's listening to this, like, am I saying I have a cure for autism? No. I'm saying I'm a dad who tried my best and I saw results. But in order for something to become medicine, you actually have to go through a proper process. And so for me, that was building language models. That was making everything in the right structure. And then we can organize the world's autism literature, making it accessible and useful. Any parent or anyone, you may have someone in your family that has a neurological condition, Alzheimer's, this. So many people around the world have the same problems. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they could just find what the latest knowledge is and also the things that could work and have a holistic approach to this? And until we have this technology, you can never get there, which is one of the main drives for me to want to build this technology and do it in a transparent order. But you shouldn't have to trust me and what I say about this, because again, my journey as a parent is the same as anyone who's got a child with ASD. It's the same as anyone who has a family member that gets multiple sclerosis or cancer. Our systems are not good enough right now to bring us the information we need unless we find an amazing doctor and an amazing group. But now with MedPalm, with our own models, with other things, We can finally be at that point where we're never lost, when we can say what could work. So an example is clonazepam. It's prescribed at a 1,000 microgram dose for anxiety. At a 5 microgram dose, my son could sing because it potentiated.
And he was nonverbal.
He was nonverbal. And at 20 micrograms, it stops working. It's $6 a year intervention. Because this is the way that like neurotransmitters work. So like when you pop a Nitol, an antihistamine, to go to sleep, right? What it does is it floods a whole bunch of your neurotransmitters, including the H1 neurotransmitter. And that's the one that makes you sleepy. But then other ones give you dry mouth and other things. Something like Remeron in a microdose just triggers H1. And it'll knock you out without any side effects. But it's just incredibly cheap, you know? Understanding things like neurotransmitters is not something that most of us ever have to do, unless you're super hyper focused on it for years. Because I was like, I need to figure out my son's neurotransmitters. I'm talking to all the top doctors and I'm lucky because I have access to them. What do I do now? So that's when I realized that, you know, this AI was a big thing. And actually one of the really interesting things is, why couldn't he talk? It's because he had too much noise in his brain. So you've got cup. A cup can mean a cup, or it can mean cup your hands or cup your ears or World Cup. He couldn't form those connections because his brain was too noisy. And so he did applied behavioral analysis, which is teaching you this is a cup, this is a cup, this is a cup, with gamification to reconstruct those after his brain calmed down. It's actually very similar to this generation of AI. We described earlier how it learned principles. It's called a latent space of meaning. So that point and dot, that pixel, becomes a cup because it understands the principle of cuppiness. So when you type in World Cup or cup your ears, it gives you dramatically different images. Similarly, the language models do the same. Again, it pays attention to what's important. Attention is all you need was the original paper. And again, forms this latent space of the meaning of cup within the sentence. So when it says cup, it's like, well, this is going to be a World Cup, or this is going to be that. But not actively. Again, it's just a bunch of ones and zeros, a single file. And so I think that's why all this new generative AI really resonated with me. And I realized this could be the real thing that unlocks humanity or controls them forever. One of the two. So that's kind of some of the personal story behind this. Because again, like, I don't have a cure for autism. I worked as good as I can with my son with the technology at hand. However, I think that with the building blocks we're building now, us and others, there's the potential to have personalized care and knowledge for everyone who's dealing with ASD, for everyone who's dealing with multiple sclerosis or any of these other conditions, where they say there's no cure because our medical system treats people as ergodic. And what does ergodic and ergodicity mean? It means 1,000 tosses of the coin, the same as 1,000 coins tossed at once. That's why everyone gets 500 milligrams of paracetamol. It's why a lot of people have a cytochrome P450 abnormality, kind of mutation in their liver. It means you process codeine into morphine quicker, or fentanyl into death. Yet we don't do a basic genetic test on that. Because our system has to treat us as numbers, because we could never scale intelligence. We could never scale expertise. So yeah, like I said, that's some of the story behind that.
Yeah, see, this is where this starts to get interesting, because I think about this a lot in myself. So I can paint the nightmare scenario of somebody collapsing inside of themselves, having AI friends instead of real friends, and how quickly that can get distorted and become a real problem. And yet at the same time, I'm building exactly that. And the reason that I'm building that is because of the promise of AI and the incredible things that we can do as we begin to recognize more patterns and figure out, okay, where does this really go? So my wife had a tremendous health bout. It's been a while now, thankfully, but at one point I was afraid she was going to die. Her fingernails were breaking, her hair was falling out, she couldn't eat. It was just really, really, really bad. And it ends up being her microbiome, but of course it took forever to diagnose that was a problem. She was about to get immunotransglobulin transfusions.
Yep.
And I was just like, something's wrong. I don't think this is the right answer. I don't want to do that. Let's stop. Let's try to figure this thing out. And so we pump the brakes. We start researching the microbiome, looking into that, testing things. And the thought of having AI to be able to say, okay, let's take genetic data and read the genetic database that's ever been collected, all of that.
Yep.
Let's look at all the different foods. responses, match all that together. And if you can get that level of pattern recognition, and now you can engage I think because part of the problem is your microbiome is changing daily. It's probably changing hourly. And if you were able to track all of that and say, okay, with your genetics, with your current state of your microbiome, here's exactly what you should be eating, maybe even with nutrients from food grown in that area. Like it really may be
Yep.
that specific. And when you can find patterns in that sort of insane level of data, now you've really got something. And that's but one of the many areas where I think that this could be utterly transformational.
Yeah, I mean, like right now, the AIs are know-it-alls. You can know-it-all graduates, but you have specialists. You'll have a nutritionist AI. You will have a microbiome AI. You will have a personal trainer AI. Like, why was Peloton successful? Attractive people shouting at you. We could generate that now. Everyone suddenly gets that personalized to them. But more than that, it's not just the information being in this tiny model. You have retrieval augmented models and other things, which means these models now interact with existing data sets and knowledge sets. So you use something like Perplexity AI. It doesn't only answer your questions with GPT-4, it gives you references. So you can say, what about Emad? And it'll link to all of the things as it gives individual stuff. And this will only advance from here. So you can dig into as much depth as possible that you want with a whole team of people around you, even if you're by yourself. So you should never be alone again in terms of you can be connected to people like you in the same problem as you. We can build better teams, and all the information of the world is at your fingertips in a way that it was never before, including your own private information. So like one of my favorite apps, it does use some battery, is Rewind AI. It takes a screenshot of your MacBook screen every time it changes and OCRs it. And then it gives a timeline. So I can type in impact theory and it will look through everything that's ever been on my MacBook screen. It's all stored locally, and find where impact theory is on YouTube, or there's a picture of this mug, and it shows it in a timeline. So I can go back and I can see what I looked at before or after that.
What? Wow. So you can map your own sort of connective trees with whatever.
And what happens when you combine that with a language model? Everything you see on your screen stored locally with an open source language model, it creates the memex, and it sees what you've paid more attention to versus less attention. Again, they're dystopian versions of this. I'm talking about the utopian version, which is ADD me can finally remember what I was doing, what I was looking at, the context, the search tree as I was searching all these different things, clicking from place to place. And then you can set agents to go and recreate that journey and search all the other stuff that you didn't search. This is really positive because, again, how much of our life is done searching for knowledge, searching for information that's relevant to us?
Talk to me about the paper, Attention is All You Need. I've heard you and other people bring this up multiple times. I haven't read it, but this is like the big breakthrough.
Yeah, this was the 2017 paper by the Google team, all of whom now left Google. And basically what it was is that classical big data took big data and then Facebook extrapolated it so that when it found 17 pieces of information about you, it could target you with ads. That was the classical big data thing. They even create shadow profiles of you. So when you go on Facebook, they actually got a shadow profile that they then connect to your real profile.
What's the shadow profile?
Like, it's like, what if there was a Tom on YouTube, on Facebook? Because there's all these connections to this unknown person. And then it just fills you in automatically. That's why it figures out your preferences so quickly without listening to you. So Attention is All You Need said that not all data is important. You need to pay attention to what is important in a sentence, what's important in a time series, because that's the nature of being able to spot the tiger in the kind of thing. That was the missing part. And so the transformer architecture that came from that, and you have different architectures now, is what led to GPT-3 and others general purpose
Why is it
transformer.
called transformer architecture if what it's doing is pinpointing what's important? Why not important architecture or
Well, it kind of, again,
architecture?
attention is the mechanism that it does to kind of transform the information, tokenize it, and then figure out these latent spaces of meaning.
So are the tokens the important pieces?
The tokens are important. That's how you take a word and then you split it up into its constituent parts, and then you try and figure out what the most important part of it by doing pattern analysis at ridiculous scale. So something like a GPT-4 would use probably from the kind of things on semi-analysis that have been leaked, if they're correct, it uses a supercomputer 50 times faster than NASA's fastest supercomputer for like 3 months. It uses like 20, 30 megawatts of electricity.
Whoa.
And 10 trillion words go into that, and it figures out all the connections between them and what generally comes next. So what it does is just literally figures out what word comes next. And so this was a big breakthrough, because what it meant is that you didn't have to have hugely complicated big data algorithms. You just needed to have very large compute to scale. And so compute went exponential, and then you just threw more and more GPUs at it, and it figured out more and more things. And as you scaled, it had more and more emergent properties, which surprised everyone.
Do you know who John Nash is?
Yeah.
It sounds like that. So John Nash, he unfortunately was schizophrenic, but he was, he's the guy from A Beautiful Mind. For people that don't know, watch the movie Russell Crowe, fantastic movie. And he obviously doesn't know he's schizophrenic, and he starts seeing patterns in everything.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that this thing is, whatever the human brain, whatever algorithms we have running that allows us to very quickly suss out what's important, that it's doing that, but at an extraordinary high level.
Yeah, you have to remember, like, there's a saying, all intelligence is compression. You take everything you've listened to this, you only remember a few things. And the whole of computer science is based on information theory from Claude Shannon. And if I want to summarize it, information is valuable only if it changes a state, or as much as it changes a state. So if listeners are listening to this and they don't take away anything, this is a useless thing, or maybe they just put it on the radio because they like hearing your voice or something like that, right? But if they take something away from it, then it's valuable. You've had a good use of your time. So you start seeing patterns in everything. But one of the things that, again, people I think misunderstand with this technology is GPT-4 is not a program. Stable Diffusion is not a program. It's a large amount of text, images, etc., where the output is a single file of ones and zeros. It's like a filter. You can recursively kind of put something through it, but it's just guessing the next word when you type a prompt. Even if the prompt is the whole of The Great Gatsby and the whole of Ulysses by James Joyce, and you're telling it to combine them together. It then pushes it through that sieve, that filter, and the output is something that combines them both together. Single files. We've never seen anything like this, but probably the closest thing probably listeners would have heard to this is a codec. Where with music and things like that, we had these audio codecs that you had one file type and another file type, and you had this single file that translated between them.
Was that, is that compression, or is that recognizing this thing in that format would look like this?
So again, this is compression of intelligence is what it is. So again, it's like a translator function. These are universal translators for context. And so you push it through the sieve, and then stuff comes out where it's predicting the next word, or it's denoising kind of a pixel to achieve that, because you're just passing it through this sieve again and again and again.
Yeah, it's I unfortunately don't understand it by first principles, but I get it by analogy. You're feeding it so much data, it's recognizing the patterns in that
Interconnectedness,
data.
yeah.
And it's able to say, okay, this is the all right, this is written in the style of Stephen King. This is written in the style of Hemingway. So even though they're using the same language, their vast majority of the words are going to overlap, but there's different patterns, rhythms, even different subject matter presented in a different way, tone.
Except for the fact that it's not actively doing that. It's like a mega sieve. And depending on the words that you put in, the words that come out are different. So it's literally
is the sieve the prompt of write it in the style of Stephen King?
That's what goes into the sieve. It goes into the filter.
So what is the filter?
The filter is this compressed knowledge.
The principles.
The principles.
Because it's not actually compressed knowledge, right?
Yeah, it's principles. Yes, it's principles. So it would be like a really good book of principles. Except for it's compressed way beyond a book ever was. Because a book is a compression of information. And that's why it can kind of do this, because it looks at books, it looks at articles, and they're all compressions of information. To write an article is a huge endeavor that then comes out with something where they're trying to convey a few things. A book is an even larger endeavor. And so again, it's very difficult to wrap your head around. Like even for me, like you have a file, and it can do all these things. Versus these gigantic computer server farms with programs and logic of ones and zeros. There's no program here.
Yeah, and it's important for people to understand that so first of all, the AI scientists that are building these things do not understand how this all works. And even if you ask ChatGPT-4 to explain how it works, it doesn't know.
No one's quite sure exactly how we're getting all these emergent properties. And it's constantly surprising. Like, oh, now it can add. And then you start tying it together so it goes through this file multiple times. It shows more and more kind of agentic activity. In fact, the next step of this, and this is what OpenAI and Google are both doing, is there was this thing called AlphaGo. There's an amazing documentary where Google's DeepMind division created an AI to beat humans in the game of AlphaGo, or Go. So Go is like chess, except for there's almost a myriad, infinite number of potential moves, so you can't calculate them. Like, you can't brute force it like Deep Blue do with Kasparov. So instead, it learned to play against itself. It's something called Monte Carlo tree simulation, where it learns different principles, dreams. Again, an amazing documentary on YouTube about this. And it beat Lee Sedol, who was a 9th Dan player, one of the best in the world, far beyond everyone else, the Magnus Carlsen of Go, 7-1. What they're doing now is they're combining those models with these language models to make them agentic. So models that can plot and plan and other things with language models that can predict what's next to create things that really understand context even better.
Okay, so I understand enough about how the AlphaGo system works. I want to understand this. So AlphaGo is going to play against itself. So you give it the rules of Go, you give it the objective, and then you set it loose, and it just plays and plays and plays and plays and plays, and it plays against itself. And then I know at one point Lee Sedol, if I remember correctly, was the number 2 player, and people thought, well, first of all, you're never going to beat him, and they did, but they couldn't beat the number 1 player. And then they created another variation, and it played against AlphaGo, and then it ended up smashing.
It was Mu0, I think, came after AlphaGo.
Okay. So how do you get a language model where there is no objectively right answer unless you're doing trivia? How do you get it to know what the reward is? How do you get the quote unquote right answer?
Much of this now is about reward functions. So GPT-4, when it comes out of the box, maybe we're getting a bit too into the weeds, is a pre-trained model on the giant supercomputer.
Yep.
Then we use reinforcement
learning. And just so
learning.
everybody knows, pre-trained model means principles.
Yeah, principles. Take all this knowledge, all these words, squish it down into a file.
And then run it on a computer that's literally set up like a brain, where there's like a bunch of neurons and they're interconnected.
Yeah, these are the tensor cores on the NVIDIA GPUs.
Yep.
And so mimicking the brain on your little
literally
4090, it has AI chips baked in there.
For anybody that wants to know, they kick off so much heat, you can see it from space.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think our supercomputers are like 10 megawatts of electricity. Each one of these cards uses 700 watts. Yeah.
Utterly fascinating to me. So anyway,
all clean energy, by the way, for our ones. For anyone who asks. So what you've got is, when it came out, they took 6 months to make it human. Because they trained it on, like, I don't know, all of YouTube and the whole internet. Obviously, it would turn out a bit weird. And so you have a reward function through something called RLHF, reinforcement learning with human feedback.
Yep.
Where you give an objective function to say, don't answer questions about how to make napalm. And don't answer.
The objective function technically is please your human overlord.
Please your human overlord.
Got it.
And so much of this alignment question is focused on taking these big models and trying to make them so they won't kill us some way or say bad things for a given definition of bad things. Like one of my takes on alignment, and is like we should have better data sets. We should move away from web crawls.
Can you? Yeah, it's fair. I want to ask you about that, but explain to people exactly what alignment is. Aligned with what?
Alignment. This is a cool thing of Anthropic. There was a great New York Times piece on them recently, and others. Is if we build an AI that outperforms humans and is more capable than us. Because it might not just be a single file. It might be 1,000 different AIs all working in different ways. So you've got your
like
AlphaGo type AI and this, a swarm. Because, humans are swarms. Our organizations are swarms that are highly specialized, right? Might be 1 million AIs. How do we make sure it doesn't kill us? Or how does it make sure it doesn't enslave us? Or how does it make sure that it doesn't give us eternal suffering?
Also lame.
Yeah, these will be kind of sucky. How do we make sure it's aligned with human interests? And so this is an unsolved problem. OpenAI have announced they're putting 20% of their compute to try and solve this. Anthropic was set up to do this, although I believe that the only answer they've come up with is let's build an AGI first, an artificial general intelligence, that will then stop all other AGIs from coming, which is kind of scary, to say the least.
Why do they think that that would work? Like that seems... So Elon Musk has likened AI to a demon summoning circle, and we're all just hoping that the demon that comes forth is going to be kind, but we don't know.
We don't know. In OpenAI's own words in their Road to AGI post, they say this could be an existential threat and wipe out humanity, end democracy and capitalism. But if we don't do it, someone else will. This is part of the unpleasant race condition. Again, it gets the headlines. I think it'll probably be okay. But with the way we're going right now, you're going to go from 2 companies being able to build this technology, or maybe 3, including Anthropic, to 20 or 30 in a year or 2. And what's the odds that they all do it properly and align this technology properly? I think it's pretty low. What's the odds that if we train it on the whole internet, including the whole of YouTube, because we don't have enough tokens, not enough words to feed into it, that it'll turn out a bit weird? Very high. So it took 6 months to tune it to being a human, GPT-4. And then Kevin Roos at the New York Times is like, hey, how you doing? It's like, leave your wife and come and join me.
Whoa.
I was like, oh, what? Bing came out a bit weird when it first kind of had GPT-4 in it. Because again, we feed it crap, we're going to get slightly weirdness. Now it's got a lot better, but it's lost a lot of its personality because you've been tuning it back to human preferences. You've been doing this reinforcement learning with the objective function of don't offend anyone. It's quite hard to get GPT-4 to be offensive now. But there are these 2 phases of this technology. I think with better data, we can have more aligned models. I think with better data and national data, we can have more representative models, because you'll never have technology that's not biased. So the only question is, who's biased? Well, because you have to build it in a certain way. Like, even though it understands all the contexts, like right now, these models are trained on the whole internet, which is largely a Western artifact. Largely trained in English.
How much do you worry about bias? Are you more worried about bias or alignment?
I'm more worried about alignment, I think. I think this is one of the reasons that we release open models, so you can see how the cookie is made. Like, we're the only company that offers opt-out of data sets. Literally the only AI company in the world. It's
so if I'm
crazy.
an artist and I don't want you training on my art, I can back out.
Had 167 million images opted out of our data set, yeah. We're the only company in the world that does that, which I find kind of insane. So my thing is open auditable, which means that you can tune your own culture into these models. We're helping multiple nations build national models with their broadcaster data that then can represent that. And, try to address some of this inherent bias within the data sets. Algorithmic bias has been an issue that affects real world, and it'll affect more and more of the real world as you get into these models, because we will outsource more and more of our minds to them. Because again, like when you got
a small subset of people will outsource their mind to it.
You can reboot your life, your health, even your career, anything you want. All you need is discipline. I can teach you the tactics that I learned while growing a billion-dollar business that will allow you to see your goals through. Whether you want better health, stronger relationships, a more successful career, any of that is possible with the mindset and business programs in Impact Theory University. Join the thousands of students who have already accomplished amazing things. Tap now for a free trial and get started today.
So in the near term, I'm way more worried about bias. In the long term, bias is not going to lead to an existential threat.
Yes.
But alignment can. But let's talk about bias for a second. So I am very uneasy about how rapidly bias finds its way into this stuff. And that becomes another... So if let's say that we all get our individual AI and you get yours young and it's your primary education tool and it's biased as the day is long, now you run into real issues, because at a time of optimal malleability, you're programming a kid's mind with something that's super biased.
Yeah, I mean, like, what if you have the little AI of Xi, right? Which is a little tiny Xi Jinping that grows up and tells you how great Xi Jinping is.
Lovely.
Well, that's biased, but that's inevitable. They already have it as an app that actually tracks
Seriously?
your eyes. Yeah.
What?
Well, it's not an AI, but they have the little app of Xi. It's this like little book where it actually tracks your eyes for attention. Like, are you actually looking at this?
Does this feed into the credit score?
I'm not sure if it's been hooked up, but of course it will be. Why wouldn't you?
This is so scary. So look, I thought, we were on the happy part. Now we're back to that. But that's really terrifying. And when you have a state that is not interested in any individual.
You've got the collective.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is true, but I saw a headline that said in China now, the phone will alert you if somebody with a lower social credit score than you is calling you, and it warns you if you answer this call, it will lower your credit score.
It's effective, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, even if it isn't true, again, it fits the objective function of perpetuating that particular system, which is not necessarily our system, but systems around the world shift. So this is why you have an inherent bias. Whose bias is it? Who's the one who creates the AI nanny? And
Is this why you're doing things regionally?
This is why I'm doing things regionally, but also allowing people to own their own models. So the objective function of the model can be that. Like in Web3, there was the saying, not your keys, not your crypto. So my saying is not your models, not your mind. Because I do think we'll outsource more and more of our cognitive capability to this. It will be our co-pilot for life. If someone else is making that model and deciding on things, what's going to happen? Like the UAE had this model Falcon. It was a big open source model, and they were like, wow, it was actually Lighton from France who were behind it, but let's leave that to one side. You ask it about the UAE and human rights, it's like, this is a wonderful place full of fantastic things. You ask it about Qatar or Saudi, it's not so nice. Who's embedding these inherent biases in these models, right? Whose model are you using? And these can be very insidious, the biases, right? You won't pick up on them, but you hear it again and again and again, because is your nanny a conservative Republican, or is she a libertarian, or things like that? You will be influenced by that if you grow up with them, or even if you're using it day to day. Just the way it's speaking, the way it's thinking, the way it's recommending stuff, which goes far beyond a Google Maps or something like that.
Crazy. All right. So that we don't get lost back down the dark rabbit hole, what is the coolest thing that you see AI doing? I know you're building a lot of different companies leveraging this technology to do amazing things. What are some of the coolest?
So we're doing one company at the moment, which is just, the mission is to create the building blocks to activate humanity's potential. So
the building block what?
Our mission is to create the building blocks to activate humanity's potential.
Building block stack. Okay.
So every single modality, image, audio, video, 3D, language, sectoral variants and national variants. So you've got like this grid that you can pick, and you're like, I'm an Hindi investment banker. I transfer my private data into a chat GPT type thing that's just trained on my private data. Or I'm a Vietnamese illustrator. I want a Vietnamese cultural kind of image model or something like that. And then you can bring your own stuff to it. That's kind of my goal, which is to enable other people to build on top of what we're building, like a layer one for AI, effectively, but open models for private data. Whereas the other side is proprietary models, where you only be able to send a certain amount of data. Like government's not going to run on black boxes. Education, healthcare, you will need to own your own AI. So the coolest thing I've seen is just the promise of personalized education. There is nothing that's been proven to work in education except for probably the Bloom effect, 2 sigma improvement, which is one-on-one tuition. But even here in the affluent America, education system's not good. What is education optimized for? It's like a social status game mixed with a Petri dish, mixed with childcare, realistically. Like very few people are happy with their schooling, because what are we trying to optimize for? You give a one-to-one tutor that can find out if you're dyslexic, an audio learner, a video learner, visual learner, or otherwise, and they're just constantly adapting to you and bringing you information at your level.
Dude, I want to get that. Is
the most transforming thing ever.
Is anybody doing this already?
So, with kind of charity that would support Imagine Worldwide, run by my co-founder, he's been deploying adaptive learning tablets into refugee camps around the world, with the Global X Prize for Learning winner 1 billion on them. Teaching kids literacy and numeracy, 76% of them in refugee camps in 13 months and 1 hour a day. Now the goal is to bring language models to all these kids. And you have an AI that teaches a kid and learns from it, and then that data can feed a better AI. You create a lovely system that's just learning and adapting. And a kid in Mogadishu is like a kid in Manhattan. It's like a kid in, London. Once you have a generalized learning AI, you can really proliferate that around the world to customize.
What do you think this does to education? Because this is very interesting. Like, okay, now I'm just spitballing here, but let's say that I want to homeschool my kid. I would never do that in a million years, because I don't want to turn into a teacher. So, but if I could perform just the sort of babysitting function, and I give my kid a tablet that has an AI that knows exactly what I'm trying to optimize for, either for this year or for the next 12 years or whatever, and it then calibrates to my kid, knows what they're good at, how they learn, and then knows how long they're engaged, when they're distracted. Now I want the little Gigi ping thing that's like reading their eyes. Where are they looking? What are they doing? And I know that there are like certain frequency things that you can do where it's like, oh, if I hit them with this piece of knowledge, they're not sharp at this yet. So I need to hit them with it every 27-minute increment or whatever.
Or variable reward schedule or whatever.
Exactly.
You will transform education, but you can also
How
make
far out
it
are we from that?
a couple of years. Again, what happens if you have 1,000 GPT-4s? You'll get there.
Mm.
No, it's just, again, we're just, right now, we've got the building blocks, but we haven't got the design patterns. The stuff right now is literally iPhone 2G. We're just getting to the App Store stage, copy paste. And so that's the biggest transformative change, because how much would you pay for your kid to have an optimal education?
How much would I pay for that? I would pay for that right now.
Right now. So do we have the technology to do it? Yes. Does it take time to build it properly? Yes. How long does it take? A year or two? And so this is the biggest transformation we've ever seen for education. Again, human flourishing. Because that can also bring you the information about autism or multiple sclerosis or the best filmmaking techniques. Again, everyone's thinking one-on-one. You should think 1 to 1,000, and then you optimize the 1,000. You get rid of all the general knowledge, you make them specific.
What do you mean by that? Say that in a different
So
way.
GPT-4 knows everything.
Mm-hmm.
You can ask it about like the most obscure things. Does it need all that knowledge? No. You've bulked, now you have to cut. And then you have a specialist model for calculus that knows
So I'd
everything.
actually have different teachers.
Different teachers, and then a teacher that basically brings these teachers together and tells them, yeah, this is what Tom's like, he's a bit cranky in the mornings, but then he wakes up in the afternoon, because even in the best schools, a teacher has 1 to 20 attention for all the kids. You'll have a whole bunch of AIs for you and for your kids. And again, are you a visual learner or are you an auditory learner? Do you have dyslexia? Can our system at the moment adapt to that? No way. Can the system that I described adapt to that?
Instantly.
Do we have the technology for that?
Yes.
Is it going to happen?
Yes.
This is the thing.
It's a call and answer show now. I love this.
But then, if you're homeschooling your kid, do you want the kid to be by himself? What if you had 10 kids together and the AIs were encouraging them to interact with each other in a positive way and build stuff together and share knowledge? Older kids teaching younger kids, leveraging the technology, adapting the technology, understanding the technology. That's super powerful. It's not necessarily everyone in their own little worlds, right? Because we can use this AI to bring people together in an efficient manner. Because there's nothing like human connection, right? That's always a concern about homeschooling and things like that. That's why school has a pro-social component. But then the nature of a teacher changes. The nature of a doctor changes. And that's why I think education and healthcare are the biggest disruptions, because you have something brand new, especially when the AI is more empathetic than a normal doctor. That doesn't tell me the AI is super empathetic. It tells me doctors should probably be more empathetic. But most of the doctors I know kind of hate their patients.
Interesting.
Well, because, how many teachers are happy? How many doctors are happy?
Right. Oh, I get why teachers would hate their patients.
Patients.
But,
Yeah.
ooh, that is very interesting, man. So, okay. There's two things that I want to talk about here. One, as we get embodied, I want to know what that does. So actual robots, for people that think that's off in the distance, you are not watching enough YouTube videos.
No.
Because between Boston Dynamics and Elon Musk's, what's it called?
Tesla bots.
Primus?
Yeah.
Optimus, thank you.
Yeah.
It is very close. You have Boston Dynamics has robots that can do parkour.
Yeah.
It's insane.
There's Helodi and there's a whole bunch of others as well. They're catching up fast.
Yeah. So that AI is going to get embodied very, very quickly. And so it's not even like teachers can't stop kids from running out of the room. They can or will be able to very shortly. Okay. So before we get to that though, I want to understand. So we have this incredible opportunity, this very fragile egg before us. We started with the scary part. But what we're talking about now is the thing that I actually spend most of my time thinking about, obsessed with how amazing this gets. But it's a fragile egg. And if we're not careful, it's going to break. How do we, as you think about, you signed the document, you're one of the traitors, Emad, that signed that slow down document that I was really shocked to see a lot of very smart people sign. I teasingly, of course, say that you're a traitor because I want to get this cool stuff as fast as I can, but we need to do it well. And so what I want to know is, in an ideal world, in your ideal world, where we actually pause for a second, you said you want to broaden the conversation, but what do you ask people to think about?
I ask people to think about So I'm the only one apart from Elon. Elon and I kind of signed both letters. So there was a minimum viable letter, which is we should treat this as big a issue as climate or pandemic, and then there was a more involved letter. And so the more involved letter came first, and then led to the second letter that was like something everyone could agree on. I think the thing we should look at is, again, the example I give to everyone who's listening to this. How would your life, your society, your community, your business change if you had infinite graduates?
Can we say infinite smart people? There's something
Infinite
about
smart,
graduates
okay,
that
infinite
trips
smart
me up.
people. Yeah, like again, infinite smart people, infinite talented young people, shall we say. And they can draw, they can
Why
code,
do they
they
have to
can
be
write.
young? Because they're not wise
They're
yet?
not wise yet.
Got it? Okay.
So when you talk about hallucinations, think about it in terms of post hoc rationalization. You know, when you have a very smart young person, they just make something up
Or
sometimes.
old person. Dude,
Or old person.
people are so blind to their own motivations.
But they don't have experience.
Got it.
They're just fresh out. They're a bit rough around the edges. Again,
Whip it smart, but
whip it
not
smart.
wise.
Yeah. So, you know, mile wide, not too deep, but actually surprisingly deep, right? How would it impact your life personally, your community, your society, and others? Because that's actually a good framing, I think, for thinking about the disruption that will come and the potential that will come. Because what we just said about education and all that, that's again your army of analysts, you know, your army of teachers. You can give personalized teachers, personalized medicine, personalized everything, because we've learned to scale humans. And the scaling of humans is first the scaling of human expertise being available to everyone. And the other part is bringing people together.
Yep.
And so the pause is partially to that, but partially because we need to widen the conversation, because I don't know how we get rid of many of these bad externalities, and neither does anybody else. But most people, even now, aren't asking the right questions. Something we discussed earlier. You have to figure out what questions we need to answer and how we're going to answer them, and create systems that can adapt to whatever craziness, because I would not be surprised to see riots at the same time as I would not be surprised to see everyone super happy. There is such a divergence of things that the only thing that I'm sure about is that everything's going to change. And the only thing I'm sure about is that this is the biggest change that we've ever seen, faster than anything, and maybe humanity has ever seen at this pace that's going to happen. Because it's the core of what makes a human, telling stories, information flow. And that's changed forever. So that's why I was like, let's pay attention to this now. Let's broaden the discussion. Let's ask hard questions. Let's try and answer hard questions, because we don't have answers. And this is the only time you can do it, because like I said, right now, everyone's getting ready for the next generation supercomputers. They hit at the end of the year the next year. And then you go from 2-3 companies that can build these models to 20-30. And you go to 200-300. And so if you don't have some principles in place, then these models will affect every part of your life without you being part of that discussion. I don't think that's right.
All right, we got to tune up your questions a bit here, Emad. That was loose.
Is-
What is the hardest question that we need to ask? Let's ask and answer right now.
The hardest
Here we
question I think we need to ask is, how will we adapt to potential wide-scale job loss?
Yes. Okay, so how would we actually think through that problem? So job loss, for me, for the sake of this argument, I think it's worth saying there are two components to that. Component number one is going to be there is potential economic catastrophe in job loss, but so that we can simplify the problem set, since this ultimately is a podcast and not a congressional hearing, I will assume that whatever decline we have from just the sheer number of people working, we make up for in productivity,
Yes.
and that we're able to
Keep an economic surplus. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're able to help people. And off camera, we were talking about something like that. So let's just pretend that those balance out. So not going to deal with the economic potential there, but meaning and purpose, I think that one gets really problematic. But we have an amazing tool at our disposal, which is AI. Now, I have a feeling as we chase this down, the only thing that we have to worry about, really, truly, I think it all really does boil down to alignment. If we knew that we could just keep making it smarter and having the AI like taking readings so that I can't fake it out, I can't pretend that I'm happy, it like really knows where I'm at. And then it can start putting things before me, connecting me with other people like, oh, you know this skill, this person's in need, let me put you guys together. And then you can have sort of the AI supervision, but they're there, they're helping each other out, they're connecting. The only reason I don't think that's a panacea is I worry that as we make this thing smarter and smarter, that then it's like you said, I'm bored, I don't want to do this.
Yeah, and there's this concept of all watched over by machines of loving grace, right?
And that's scary, you're saying?
Who knows? Like, once we build something that's more capable than us, all bets are off. The only way to perfectly align a system is to remove its freedom. I mean,
I'd say it's not aligned at all at that point.
Well, this is the
At
thing.
that point, you've bypassed alignment and you've gone straight to shackles.
You've gone to shackles. So if we all know people more capable than us. The only way to perfectly align them is to shackle them. You can have imperfect alignment, though.
That's enslavement, man. That's not.
It is.
That's not alignment. So is that because, so what I heard you just say is there is no way to align something smarter than us.
I don't think there's a way to
enslave them, but
I
you
don't
can't align them.
I don't think there's a way to align the outputs. I think that you can align the inputs. You raise it right.
Okay, let me run an idea by you. This is probably Pollyanna. I'm very open to that. But as I think about this, I think people take a super human-centric approach to this. And because evolution has given us, we are an active species, and evolution has programmed us with algorithms running in the back of our mind that insist that we do certain things to avoid a sense of dis-ease.
Yep.
I think that formula is very identifiable, and it goes something like this. Optimize physically so you feel good.
Yeah.
The reason that stuff feels good is because it's going to optimize your performance. That's going to make you most likely to survive long enough to have kids. So you need to be chosen as a mate. You need to be able to acquire resources. You need to be healthy enough to get somebody pregnant or to be pregnant and carry to term, all that stuff. So all those algorithms are running in the back of your mind. You have two levers that nature's pulling on, pleasure and pain. But by default, we're active. We have to go out because there's no one meal you can eat where you're not going to need to eat another one. There's no one moment of sex so gratifying you're not going to have sex again. So it's just like all these things are pushing at us to be active, to move. AI doesn't have to be that way.
No.
AI does not need those same impulses.
It doesn't have a limbic system.
Correct. So knowing that it doesn't have a limbic system, and it doesn't have a limbic system because it does not need to be hardwired for survival, like the way that I think we get to alignment, and please tell me where my thinking is erroneous. The way I think we get to alignment is you build a computer that does not care if it lives or dies, that it is completely indifferent to being turned on or turned off. If you could do that and it had no impulse to procreate and all it wanted to do was, it's basically Asimov's 3 laws of robotics.
Yeah.
That it just wants to adhere to those. It wants to do what you tell it, not hurt you, and only ignore you if you tell it to do something that violates the rule of not hurting you or somebody else. So you have this really simple set of rules. That's its only desire in the world. So if you tell it turn off, it turns off and has it doesn't feel badly about it.
Well, again, this concept of feelings, right? And in Asimov's books, you had the zeroth law that kind of was added above that. So this is what Anthropic is trying to...
I don't know that one.
The zeroth law kind of supersedes all laws if kind of the whole system is at risk, effectively. But this is what Anthropic's trying to do with the constitutional AI process. So you have the base model, and they have a constitution that the AI adheres to that tunes it constantly. So a series of kind of constitutional principles. Again,
is it as open for interpretation
as
a real constitution?
No one knows what the right constitution, the right laws are. This is the thing, like our intellect only goes so far. And we've already seen with laws and constitutions, you can make those go anyway. Like North Korea has a fantastic constitution.
Does it really?
It does. Yeah, it's actually quite liberal.
And they just don't adhere
Well, it's their interpretation of it. Come on.
Interesting.
This thing, like, you have to adhere to it because the AI, what are feelings? What is objective function? Like, one of the key concerns on alignment is paper clipping. You tell the AI to make a paperclip, and it's like, oh, well, let's just make the whole world a paperclip. You're like, how do you solve climate change? Just kill all the humans. And it doesn't have any like feelings about that. It's just like, well, this is a logical step to take.
Yep.
Doesn't
Asimov's
cost.
three laws covers that though.
But then, does it cover everything? This is a question, right? And how do you embed it into a system that's likely to be not just one file? It's not a program, right? It's likely to be a million different files. It's likely to be a collective hive mind intelligence. We don't exactly know how this emerges, and we don't know
That
how to
doesn't
hard
feel
code
right to me. Why do we have to make it complex? I worry that as you make it complex, that that's where things sneak in. You get emergent phenomena that you couldn't anticipate. Whereas, go ahead.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. It's going to become complex by default because the AI will proliferate and they'll start talking to each other.
Okay.
And at the same time, you'll have bigger and bigger giant AIs. Like I was talking to some people last week and they're like, right now, the maximum training run for an AI costs $100 million. They're talking about $1 billion or $10 billion to train even bigger models right now. We don't know what emergent behaviors or how those things will act. All we know is like, what if you tell it to make a Stuxnet to take down the global electricity grid?
Yep.
It can probably do that. You know, and again, the range of potential bad outcomes.
Okay, so really fast, I want to...
a sub-superhuman AI, it's difficult for us to comprehend.
You've mentioned Stuxnet twice now. For people that don't know Stuxnet, it's pretty ingenious. It was a virus that was embedded at like the chip level. I mean, just as deep as you can imagine. And it proliferated everywhere, silently replicating. And its only job was to shut down Iranian nuclear reactors. Pretty brilliant. And I saw the stat at one point. It was like some freakish percentage of all computers in the world are contaminated with it.
Yeah, and it made them centrifuges spin around, so they exploded.
Yeah. So terrifying in that if you're the one that thing is aimed at, not ideal to think how ubiquitous it is. But okay, so you could get an AI to do something like that. But what I'm operating under the assumption I'm so naive, I just can't see it. So perfectly happy. But help me see where I am naive, because I don't understand why you can't just don't give AI these strong impulses for progress. Don't give them an impulse for replication.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, this is the thing. Like Elon Musk has just launched XAI. As we kind of X.AI, as we kind of speak this, and his thing is to create an AI that searches for truth. So he wants to give it an impulse, which is to search for the meaning of the universe and truth and other things like that. But then someone else might not give it an impulse, and you might have someone downloading the weights of GPT-4 or 5.
So this is a tragedy of the commons thing
on a USB stick, and then they're like, I want to take down America. And they'll be like, let's take 1,000 GPT-4s and tell it build Stuxnets to take down America. It's not intelligent yet. It's still dangerous. We don't know when this thing will become actually intelligent or self-aware, or if it may never become. But we can see the probability of outcomes here. It could be absolutely fine. It could be very bad. There are no standards. So what you suggested, it could work. Only if everyone does it.
We're never going to get everyone to do anything.
We're never going to get anyone to do anything. That's why one of the main things and proposals in alignment is let's build an AI first and tell that AI to stop any other AI from achieving sentience. It's what's known as a pivotal action. And that's the best of a lot of bad things. My thing is let's build national data sets. Let's represent the diversity of humanity. Let's give the AI the right food so it's raised in the right way. And it's more likely to be aligned as a result of that than training on the whole internet and crap. Is it a panacea? Is it perfect? No.
Do you know the story of Buddha?
Which?
So whether this is historically accurate or not, probably irrelevant. Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, if I remember correctly, prince, dad keeps him in the castle or the palace, whatever, forever, never lets him see outside of it. So he has no idea that there's people suffering. Life inside is just amazing. Then, of course, one day he gets out and he encounters suffering, and it ends up changing the entire course of his life. Punchline being, you can try to hide suffering and things like that from people for only so long. They are eventually going to find it, and they are going to react. And so if we try to hide the internet from the AI or train it out of them, they will eventually find the internet. So I don't understand. Like, the internet is just all humans acting in all the crazy, weird ways that we act.
But then the reward function of the internet is not necessarily the reward function that we would like to teach our kids or try to teach a general purpose AI. Yes. They can interact with that, but they can learn how to adapt to it. Just like if you raise your kids well and you show them the internet, They should be able to deal with it
So
because they're
wouldn't
capable.
we be, rather than hiding the internet, wouldn't we be better? See, I'll finish the sentence. Wouldn't we be better giving the AI values? The problem is this is all anthropomorphic. We are assuming that they are human-like.
You can give AI values. This is the reinforcement learning function.
Are you giving it values or are you giving it reward function?
You're going to reward. I'd say there's not much of a difference there.
Hmm.
I said you can embed things in the AI so it acts in certain ways. You can expose it to the internet, but again, we have something called curriculum learning in AI, whereby literally we teach it one thing and then we increment it with something else and something else and something else and something else. How are we teaching these things? What are we teaching it in what order? Do we start with all of the internet and then distill it down? That's how we're doing right now. Or do we teach it a whole bunch of high quality stuff and then augment it from there? We already have evidence. There's the Tiny Stories paper and the Phi paper from Microsoft that you can have a far more efficient AI if you only teach it high quality things.
So you don't have to tell it, ignore that. Don't answer like that. Don't say that.
Yeah, exactly. You can just teach it a good base and then it goes from there. And it scores higher on a human evaluation and other metrics, but we don't know what the right data set is. It's just right now, we said, let's scale. More data, more compute. Now we're like, what's the right data? What's the right compute? Like our image model, we have over 120 different clusters of images. Only like 9 are used like 95% of the time. All the rest of the data is just bunkum. What does that look like for a language model? Like, do you need to train it on all of those auto-generated transcripts of like Spider-Man pulling out someone's tooth on YouTube and all these weird videos? There's a whole subculture of generated videos where you have like Spider-Man and SpongeBob SquarePants and Mickey Mouse like having a fight and stuff like that.
I got to find these corners.
You don't. It's a deep, dark area of YouTube. You don't want to go there, man.
Very interesting. Okay, so this still feels like ultimately what we're worried about here is the computer becoming sentient. In fact,
or no, not even sentient. I think there's a degree of dangers even before you get sentient.
But only as a tool, right? Where a human is leveraging it to do bad things.
Yes, or like a group of humans coming together, there's suddenly a race condition where it just goes. It's not trying to do something bad. The humans don't want it to do something bad, but it happens. Just like the example I always give is YouTube optimized for engagement, which then optimized for extreme content, which is optimized for ISIS. Nobody at YouTube wanted ISIS to do well. All of a sudden it did, because that's what the algorithm was optimized for. And so once you start getting agentic AI that you let loose on the internet and it can make decisions according to its reward function, you could get some weird stuff happening.
What's agentic?
Agentic AI is AI that can go and pay a bill. It can go on the internet. It can search more stuff. It comes back like little agents.
Okay, so...
and it learns. It constantly learns. This is the other thing about robotics, actually. We kind of skipped over. So yeah, robots are getting massively capable, and they're heading towards human levels, just like self-driving cars. Actually, they're pretty much here. You can get a Waymo and a Cruise and just go around San Francisco, right, without any human drivers. What happens with kind of AI copyright and other things like that? Do they have to close their eyes not to train, or do they train on everything they see? And does it disrupt blue collar work? So you'll get a billion robots? We're not sure. But that'll be slower than what we have right now, which is information robots, the GPT-4s and others of the world. Those spread much faster because you don't actually have to build a freaking robot.
Okay, so before we depart from the alignment problem, is the only convincing solution you've seen put forth create an AGI that stops all other AGIs from being created?
No, I think that'll probably kill us. Because
well, that's hopeful.
Yeah, it's a race. I think the only thing that
Why is the default there? You think that it'll kill us?
Because it's being programmed to do a restrictive action. So if you want to really stop it from creating another AGI, you have to get rid of the humans that could create it as well. You know, like, again, this is a very negative reaction thing. I think, again, Elon's idea isn't bad, programming curiosity, although it could lead to, like, Superman, where you have, what's his name? The guy who puts Candor in a jar. Brainiac. You know, like, let's put humans in a jar. Let's just observe them. The only thing that I can think of is just better data makes better models.
So let me see if I understand Elon's idea. His way of sort of aligning it is the only impulse it has is for truth.
Truth and curiosity. It wants to understand the universe.
So it's not trying to be an agent in the world. It's simply trying to understand what is true.
Yeah, and Demis at DeepMind is very similar to this. He wants to create AGI to understand the universe better.
And that seems like the model.
That's their model, yeah. Like, again, I'm not sure about that because there's just such a wide range of potential outcomes. Like I said, from my side, I'm not building AGI. I'm not building gigantic models. I have the capability to do that with the supercompute that we have access to and the talent. But my main focus is intelligence augmentation. Smaller models that can run on the edge, models to private data to transform into intelligence, and models that bring together knowledge in certain ways so we can coordinate better. I don't want to build generalized intelligence.
Why not?
Because I don't think it's needed. I think the models that we have today, and this is something very important for the listeners, like, they're useful today. Like, you can say that we're like extrapolating the future massively, but again, you just have to use them and think, what if I had 1,000 or 1,000,000 of these things? They're so useful and they can transform the world right now. So I'd rather focus on making this available to as many people as possible so people aren't left behind. You have super AI enhanced people and super people behind. Like, I appreciate a lot of the work that OpenAI do because they don't actually do open source AI anymore, but that's fine. They don't have to. But they banned all Ukrainians and Ukrainian content from DALL-E 2, their image generation software, for 8 months for political reasons. They're entitled to do that. I think it's wrong. And what if there wasn't an alternative like Stable Diffusion? You'd have an entire nation erased from a model, an entire nation unable to create instantly. I don't think that's quite right.
Why did they? I don't understand.
They said it was due to political reasons because they didn't want any political content being created. But the upshot is an entire nation was erased from the model and an entire nation couldn't get access to the model.
Interesting. I haven't looked at that. My instinct is that feels pretty flimsy since every country is going to put out political content.
I think there's probably some list somewhere, and then the bureaucrats said, or the lawyers said something like, let's just exclude it just in case something happens. You know, like
they've since reinstated it, I assume.
Yeah, it was like 8 months that it was out. And then again, like, you have these examples whereby, like, so in Saudi Arabia, a lot of people on this call, probably not on this podcast, listen to podcasts, probably don't like them, but they're a country like any other. You can't use ChatGPT in Saudi Arabia because they're on some list somewhere. You can get around it with a VPN, but again, like, when you have a choke point on the internet and the only way to access it is through a few players, they can decide who gets it, who doesn't get it, what the biases are and other things, and it might not turn out well. Actually, the funniest thing was there was a period where they were trying to make DALL-E 2, the image generation software, OpenAI unbiased, so it would randomly allocate a gender and a race to non-gendered words. So you type in sumo wrestler and you'd get Indian female sumo wrestler. I just thought it was funny. But again, they're doing their best because that's the model, which is centralized controlled models in order to advance a whole bunch of things. And then you'll always have an Windows and a Linux, an Android and an iPhone.
What's the philosophy that drives your development?
It's building blocks for humanity's, activate humanity's potential. So if I build these models and I take them to all the countries and I hand them over, then people will build stuff that can create massive economic surplus, new jobs, and it equalizes the world. Again, my view is the global south will leap ahead. We have more challenges here in the West. But I do see it as a great equalizing function, effectively.
What do you want to see the regulatory framework here in the West be?
I think that things like the CHIPS Act in the US, there's $10 billion allocated to regional centers of excellence in AI. It should be 100% generative AI. There should be regulatory sandboxes so that our systems can be upgraded with this, because otherwise, how long will it take the government to be upgraded with this technology, or financial services and others? And I think that there should be regulation around the manipulative use of this AI for advertising in particular, because we're not going to understand what's happening. Similarly, we need to have some sort of provenance factors. So we're part of kind of various certification things. We're exploring blockchain and other things. The media wave that's going to come is going to be insane, and we don't know what's true and what's not.
What do you think about the pushback from artists? Certainly in the art community, there was a really big no AI movement. Do you get it? Do you think that they're shooting themselves in the foot? How do you?
I get it. You know, these things are fearful. A lot of illustrators were very scared because they're required to up their jobs, and it is scary. There's a question around attribution and other things as well. And again, that's why we made it transparent and offered the chance to opt out, because like everyone was kind of doing this, but no one was transparent about it. we won't need to have any crawls within a year. It will be synthetic data sets or national data sets or similar with retrieval augmented models that can look stuff up. But it is what it is now. And again, you've got to put the word out there. The actions they're taking with the various lawsuits and policy pushes would basically entrench all power with the existing IP holders. And a lot of kind of artists are pushing for something that would be akin to music copyright, or even style is copyrighted. That's a dark road that I don't think they really want to go down, and they don't really understand it. But again, I understand the fear because this is completely unknown. Just like now, from some of my previous comments, got a lot of programmer hate. Because what is a programmer? The nature of what an illustrator is will change. All the artists I know love this technology because it's just another medium for them. The nature of what a programmer is going to change. All the architects and 10 times people I know really love this technology. And this is what we've seen with like MIT studies and other things. They had a study where I think they showed that the 3rd to the 7th percentile got like 20, 30, 40% better, and the top 5% got multitudes better. Because again, how many people know how to deal with very talented youngsters? Very few. Those that can harness it get even better.
So when you look at what NVIDIA is doing, what do you think that implies for the next generation of AI?
Well, I mean, we figured out how to scale these chips. So the previous limit was as you put more and more of these supercomputers together, you had a tailing off as you scaled. So there's only so much that you could scale the compute. NVIDIA, Google, and Intel have basically cracked that now in terms of how to just stack more supercomputer chips to scale to even bigger models or models that are trained for longer. So it's either bigger or trained for longer. Trained for longer seems to be better now. And that just means that the capabilities will increase year by year. And they're already pretty darn good. The key bottleneck will probably just be actually chips to run these models, not chips to train these models, the inference side. Because right now you have a small amount of consumer interest. Next year it becomes insane. You have a small amount of enterprise interest. Next year it becomes insane. There's not enough GPUs or chips in the world to meet up with that demand.
Okay, when I think about what's going on with, I don't know if it's just NVIDIA, it's probably the wrong thing to attribute it to, but when I think about how we're getting so good at creating things that are photorealistic, you were talking earlier about as the election is coming up, you're going to get all this kind of deep fakery. You've talked about the Web3, promise of Web3 and sort of where it's ended up. What do you think the role is for deepfakes? Does the blockchain play a role? Like, how do we stop disinformation, misinformation from being a tsunami that just makes global communication unintelligible?
I mean, this is a part of content authenticity.org, which is kind of verifiable metadata, but we're looking at blockchain and other solutions, and they can get you so far. So we actually have invisible watermarking in all the models that we create, and that's why we're pushing for them to be standard, which we don't share the details of except for to the big platforms and others.
And it would be permanently visible there, or the platforms that it plays on would have to flag it?
It's visible, and then they can have kind of tools around it. Because we think that's important. That's why we try to build the defaults into our model.
Can you like download that and wipe the watermark? Can you even have AI wipe the watermark for you?
If you knew how it was. And there may be more than one watermark.
Interesting.
So we have a variety of different technologies that we've incorporated into our own ones. Because again, we release open source, so we want good defaults. I think you do need to have some sort of attribution. But actually what concerns me is I think things will be attributable, identifiable. What worries me is kind of frequency bias. Whereby if you hear the same thing over and over and over again, especially in a realistic voice, like Oprah comes out and says she hates Joe Biden, and so does Kamala Harris, and your aunt is seeing these videos all the time, and it can flag it as fake. It doesn't matter. It still forms association in your brain.
What do we do about that?
I'm not sure. I don't think we have an answer to that. Like, I've had a big amount of press against me saying that I exaggerate a lot. I'm just read definitive about the future. And you can correct it all you want, but now everyone's like, Emad exaggerates all the time. What can you do about that? You can just make the future true and show what you can do, right?
What part do they think you exaggerate about? What's possible? Or
what's possible and kind of what was there, because it's been a bit weird. Like, a lot of people were like, you didn't have a special relationship with Amazon. Before we raised any funding, we built the 8th fastest supercomputer in the world with them that was dedicated to us. You're like, that's factually true. They're like, yeah, but there's nothing like in print, and they're not saying that because it's a special deal, right? And then there's the future side where I say something like, there will be no programmers as we know them in 5 years. And they're like, oh, he doesn't know anything about programming. Right? Because these are complicated issues. And it's a crazy time and a crazy company, and maybe I'm a bit crazy too, in terms of the way that I approach this, which is just being very definitive. But again, it's an association thing, right? Like, how do I shake that off? Well, you be successful, then you become a visionary rather than someone who's hyperbolic, right? How do you affect an election? What are elections? What is representative democracy? How does democracy act in the area of zero cost creation and massive optimization? So every single speech will be run through GPT-4. Cadence, all this, everything. You get micro-targeting, you get all these things. Does it happen next year? Probably not. Next year you see some very basic stuff. But what does 2028 look like? I am not sure, genuinely. And so we do need authentication standards. We do need to have some sort of maybe antivirus AI that watches out for kind of fake stuff. But even true stuff can cause huge impact. Like the Silicon Valley Bank collapse was a true story. It wasn't something fake. They didn't have reserves. And most of our system is actually based on trust. So these are some things that concern me. I don't have the answers. But again, that's why you have to kind of raise the alarm. Like, let's try and figure this out before it comes, because maybe it doesn't happen next election. It sure as heck will in the congressional and then beyond. And again, what is the nature of democracy when you can't tell what's true or not? People were worried about this with the previous kind of era. This is something just beyond that, I think, because it's convincing.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think is going to be a very meaningful problem. I had Yoshua Bengio on the show, and he had also signed the letter saying we should pause for 6 months.
Yeah.
And when I asked him why, because considered by many to be the godfather of AI, and I was like, bro, you've been at this for so long, like why all of a sudden? And he said we were all so taken completely by surprise with how quickly AI passed the Turing test. Now, for people that don't know what the Turing test is, it's where you're having a conversation with an AI and you can't tell that they're not a real person. And he said, so yeah, we did not expect it to pass the Turing test as quickly as it did. And that changes everything. And it's just moving so much faster. And that's really the thing I want people to understand, is that when a guy that spent the last 30 years building AI says, hey, all of a sudden this is moving a lot faster than we thought it would, he's somebody that's very familiar with exponential curves.
Yeah.
And even trying to plot out the exponential curves, they didn't think that it was going to happen this fast. And that the rate, not only is the rate of change extremely fast, but there's the law of accelerating returns. So the rate of change is already fast and it's getting faster. And that's the thing that I'm really worried about is this going to be something that just blindsides us from that perspective? It has a level of capability that we didn't expect this quick.
Yeah, I think it's a bunch of S-curves all at once. So there's three of them, Jan LeCun, Jeffrey Hinton, and Joshua Bengio. And Jeffrey Hinton quit Google to say this is a massive risk. You have Jan LeCun's like, this is a massive opportunity in terms of it'll transform the world. He loves the research and things. So they've got 1 versus 2. But the reality is every expert in this area is basically saying none of us can predict what's going to happen. If you ask me about the capabilities of this technology in 1 year, I've got a rough idea. 2 years, I have no idea. All bets are off. Like, as a practical example, when can we have generated Hollywood quality movies? It's not even a question of if now, it's a question of when.
Correct.
If it happened a year from now, I'd be like, okay, sure. I would not even be surprised anymore. I think it'll be a few years from now. And even though we have one of the best media teams in the world that are building video models, I have no idea. Because there's 2 parts to this. One is the models themselves, but the second part is how we use the models and combine them. Like, there is an amazing company called Wonder Dynamics. I don't know if you've come across that.
I've used them.
It's awesome.
Unbelievable.
And it's a bunch of different models. So Wonder Dynamics, you've got me, click on it, and then say, I want him to be an alien. And it does this, and the alien's waving its arms, and it takes like 5 minutes. It would have taken days, weeks before.
Weeks
before to create
rigging a character is one of the most difficult things you're going to do in 3D. It's insane.
Minutes. And then you think, well, what is a movie, right? And you start breaking down, you're like, oh dear. Because it's not necessarily just one model, it's a model combined with other models with the right flow. Because you have one talented youngster combined with other talented youngsters in the right flow, suddenly gets these things done. And that's what makes it even harder. Because what we're talking about is models and AI. What we should really be talking about is systems. And as the models come together and build better systems, the capabilities go crazy. And then that is another S-curve exponential.
Give me what you mean by systems.
So right now, again, a lot of the interactions we have with this AI, the text to image, the avatar creation, the GPT-4 are 1-to-1. What happens when we start chaining them together to check each other's outputs? You have one that just learns everything about Tom. You have your own AI models that you train on all of the stuff that you've ever done, or all the stuff that you see on your computer screen. That's a system of lots of AIs. That's an organization of AIs. That's an ensemble of AIs. Like, again, from the leaks, GPT-4 is a mixture of experts model, which means they have a whole bunch of different models, I think 8 or something, or 12, that are experts in different areas. And then it routes the query to whatever the best
It's
model
basically
is.
specialization versus a generalist.
So we created an know-it-all, and now we're creating specialists. But we can get generalists to even check each other's answers to get better answers. Why use one when you have a dozen? So something like Wonder Dynamics uses a bunch of different models to rig a character and figure out all of the movements of the character, and then another model to do a layer over, another model to do the skinning and other things like that, because they built great software.
Yeah, this is really crazy how fast this stuff moves. Okay, so I want to talk about Web3. Web3 to me, when I think about what drew me to it in the beginning, it was entirely the technology. And when I look at the blockchain, so I obviously come at everything from the lens of entertainment. So I'm thinking about digital worlds, games, all that. And the problem is once it's digital, then it's all sort of meaningless. And so you end up having to trap people inside of an ecosystem in order for things to retain their value, because you can lock things in and make sure that things only react the way that you want, but you have to confine them. And when I had first, this is probably 7 or 8 years ago now, I was introduced to this thing that the guy at the time called V Atoms. And I was like, oh, wow, that's going to change everything, because what it does is it brings effectively the laws of physics into the digital realm. It means that I can have something, I know exactly how many there are, I know where it is, I know what you have to do to get it, I know what it does once you have it. And then, flash forward, whatever, it was probably 4 or 5 years after I heard that, I hear the letters NFT strung together for the first time. And I'm like, oh my God, this thing actually got real, because I wasn't ready to use it. And quite frankly, it wasn't ready for prime time back then. You, I think, look at Web3, I don't know, as a movement or as a technology with a bit of a chuckle. What do you think that Web3 got wrong?
I think it lacked intelligence for a start.
At the contract level?
I think the smart contracts are actually just logical contracts, but like Web 2 was AI at the core. Google, Facebook, other things. There was no AI in Web 3. And so Web 3 for me was identity and value transfer rails. But then there was no kind of intelligent routing of these things. And also they tried to bootstrap economic incentives before they created value. So there was a system created outside the existing system. All the money was made and lost at the interface. And there were some really good principles, a lot of really good people in there, but then a lot of like freaking raccoons that were just trying to make a quick buck, right? The ups and downs of the cycle means that a lot of people have been washed out, and there were a lot of good ideas there. But again, it needed something to bring it together, because to get information from one place to another, and Bitcoin paper was about information. It was a transfer of value. That's just a transfer on the ledger, right? It's not really a transfer. It's just a ledger point just changing. Applying intelligence to that makes that even better. Having intelligent market makers, having AIs that represent you. Because how are AIs when they get agentic, when they have the ability to go out into the world, not physically, but digitally, how are they going to pay each other? They're not going to have bank accounts, right? They'll probably use crypto. How there's going to be a system of record for something like image generation. You'll probably use a blockchain or something similar, maybe a Merkle tree series. There was a whole bunch of stuff around federated learning and zero knowledge proofs and things like that. AI can help it if you have standardized AI on your phone. It can make much more intelligent zero knowledge proofs. And zero knowledge proof is something like, like rather than showing a whole passport, you just say that I'm old enough to drink, and it can verifiably show that. So I think that there was a lot of promise, a lot of really intelligent stuff, a lot of good stuff around the distributed side, but then an over focus on decentralization for the sake of decentralization with massive overheads. A lot of quick buck people kind of coming in and trying to boost it up. And a lot of systems were just misaligned because they didn't learn like You don't do a fully decentralized flat democracy. You have a representative democracy and things like that. So things like DAOs just turned out to be DOs, decentralized organizations, rather than autonomous.
So is it something that you think that is going to find its way into usefulness now as we get take an AI agent that's going to need to be able to
Transact value.
yeah, exactly. Does it step into that, or because I see what we're building, I have to have the blockchain. So for me, it felt like when I was sort of living through Web3 at the height, I looked crazy to everybody because I was like, why is everybody thinking about this from a financial perspective?
Yep.
The financial side of this, I thought was going to create hyper perverse incentives, which of course it does. And so for me, it was, well, wait a second, just look at the technology. Look at what the technology allows you to do. And are you familiar with the new, I forget whatever the lead up code is, but it's protocol 6551, if I'm not mistaken.
No.
It's really interesting. It basically turns any digital asset into a Russian nesting doll. And so it is both the piece of content and a wallet in the same time. So
Yeah.
you can create an AI character. This is how I think about it. So what we want to build inside of our game is imagine an AI character. We do, in fact, have a character, and she's a merchant. So now imagine this merchant can actually go negotiate with the players in the game that may want to sell something inside of the game. And if she has actual currency, ETH, Bitcoin, whatever, she can go and negotiate with real money and have these real interactions with people. And then if she has a limited amount, she becomes an economy unto herself. And so she's buying and selling and trading until she runs out of goods, runs out of money, whatever. And that kind of thing gets very, very interesting to me. But without that layer, one, obviously, I need the entire backbone of the blockchain in order to make the digital goods have any sort of value, because otherwise they're just completely infinite. But then also that particular protocol allows you to, you're effectively embodying it and giving them agency, as you were talking about.
Yeah. And, the question is, do we use a blockchain for that and then have a global system of record, or even a regional system of record, or do you use a database for that, right? Like, the whole thing was systems of record, and an era where you can create anything for increasingly close to zero, something becomes important. Having a system of record becomes important. Is it going to be a blockchain? Is it going to be a trusted database? I'm not sure, right? Is identity going to be important here? 100% absolutely. And again, that for me was always at the core of Web3 crypto. It was verifiable identity. Bitcoin is just identity to identity transfer of value. And what happens if something goes wrong? No man need it. So I think a lot of the principles from Web3 will translate over to this new type of AI, especially because it enables distribution of knowledge. It enables knowledge to go to the edge. It enables agents to operate independent of massive infrastructure.
And again, this may just be naivete on my part, but when I imagine misinformation, disinformation, it feels like the only way around that is the blockchain. Do you see a way with a trusted database or anything else?
Yeah, you can have a trusted database. Again, we're part of content.
What would a trusted database be, and how could it ever be something that's beyond reproach when you're talking about something like
well, I mean, like, things are never beyond reproach, even with a blockchain, because it comes down to identity. Who wrote this to the blockchain? Right? So if you can co-opt the signing authority of an asset, of an image or something like that, then that shifts things dramatically, right?
You're saying it just pushes the hack to a more individualistic level.
It's an identity hack, right? So, and again, like, one of the things I'm like, you can track the provenance of an image, but then sometimes it's just around, if you're just bombarded by fake stuff all the time, you won't even know it's fake, and all the systems have to adopt a fake detector at the same time, or a provenance detector. Will we be able to adopt that suit quickly enough, given the tsunami that may or may not be coming our way? I think probably yes. It may be no. I mean, again, people were worried about deepfakes back when Deepface Lab kind of kicked off, but I'm thinking probably yes.
Yeah, that one seems inevitable to me. You're always going to remain vulnerable at some point, but at least like take political messages. You were talking earlier that, your auntie is going to be bombarded with all these messages. Okay, there may not be anything that I can do. Actually, no. I was going to say there may not be anything I can do about the repetition, but I can if I'm doing something like a DMCA strike where the system itself is built on top of a system that checks for sort of known watermarks. Like if I
Yeah,
register and say, hey, I'm candidate A and this is my blockchain signature, and if you don't see that, then this is real and this isn't real and don't play it. It definitely starts to get into an area of how much do we want to be clamping down. But
exactly. How much do we want to trust? And so it's just a lot of infrastructure that has to be implemented really quickly, a lot of standards that have to be implemented really quickly, or we have to build some sort of idea antivirus, which then again, how do you build it?
idea antivirus work?
Anytime that anything comes that the machine thinks itself on the edge is wrong or doesn't reflect your values, it identifies it. And that's a whole can of worms by itself, because something like
that's terrifying. Would we ever want to? I mean, that's like echo chamber on steroids.
It is. Will it happen?
Whoa.
Yeah, there's layers to this, like an onion, and it might get stinky if it's left out in the sun. Because again, what's Siri going to have as her personality? But are you going to have a red version of Siri and a blue version of Siri? And oh dear, this gets really complicated really quickly. Before we have the little AI of G.
Jesus Christ. Okay, so I keep wanting to go to the positive, but you keep bringing things up that spark concern. So Ray Dalio, largest hedge fund manager in the world, is a former hedge fund guy. I imagine you know exactly who that is. At last check, and this was several months ago, but at last check, he said that he believed that the U.S. had a 40% chance of civil war. Do you think that AI increases or decreases in the short term the likelihood of that level of division?
In terms of physical altercations?
Yeah.
I don't think there'll be physical altercations.
Really?
No.
Tell me why not.
Well, I think the government will exert more and more control over kind of these things, and they'll actually figure out how to do counter narratives within the next 4 or 5 years. Now, that can also mean a controlling narrative, and that's not a positive thing. But then you look at the asymmetry of kind of warfare, it takes quite a lot to actually push someone towards civil war, unless you have massive economic disruption. They need about 12% of the population to shift.
Weren't we just talking about massive economic disruption?
Yeah, I hope it doesn't happen though.
Interesting. Okay, so...
And most people, again, maybe if you have massive economic disruption, but then the youths, you just give them all girlfriends, AI girlfriends, maybe it'll be fine.
Have you heard that whole... So this is a big thing in the red pill community. I don't know how familiar you are with all that, but they talk about, oh God, what do they call them? Not numbing, but that's the idea. They use a different word for it, which I'm totally blanking on right now. But basically that you numb people out. You give them the digital girlfriend, you give them pornography, you give them video games, you give them masturbation, and they just...
They numb out. Okay, I can see that. I mean, again, like, these are insane shifts in society and dopaminergic urges in the brain. People are attacking the limbic system all the time now, right? That's a lot. And so, like I said, with me, why I set up stability is so that everyone can own their own models and have models that have objective functions for them, and it's available in all the media types, all the other types, to transform the private data of the world, and it's available across the world. Put good design patterns in place. Hope people follow them. Don't try and push the envelope on AGI and some of these other things, but it's coming. And again, the bad guys have the technology because they just downloaded it on a USB stick. And so the only thing I could think was innovation, spread, diversity, bring that to the fore. But realistically, like, you know, I tend to alternate between like massive, ridiculous hope and, oh God, what's on earth is going to happen? And all I can do is try and do my bit in hopefully it's going to have a better outcome. Because this is the other thing. The total number of people that are actually thinking about the type of stuff we're talking about is a handful. Maybe a few hundred. The total number of people that are doing something about it is literally a handful. Because most of the people involved in this sector, they just want to build better AI. They want to build AI that can do everything, and they think that that will solve all the problems. Like, literally, part of the manifesto is that, well, how do you make money? The AI will tell us how to make money. How do you solve the problems? The AI can solve alignment.
Does that strike you as patently ridiculous?
Yes. But again, like, I look at these things, like literally on OpenAI's thing, Road to AGI. It says, this could kill us all. We're going to build it anyway. Who did they ask about that? I don't know. And again, I think it's full of wonderful people, but we're in really weird times. And again, like, however many people listen to this, the reality is the technology is right there. Even if we stop today, say for instance, the technology doesn't move beyond where we go today, the world has changed.
Okay, let me, one, I think, very reasonable way to view this situation is that AI is going to be a bigger paradigm shift than nuclear energy. And there are people out there making these gigantic nuclear weapons, and you're also in this game. And what you're trying to do is make sure that everybody has a nuclear weapon so that nobody's left behind.
No, not really. I think that, again, my thing isn't AGI, it's intelligence augmentation. I'm making sure everyone has a heater at the very least.
Because okay, so are you putting guardrails on what you guys are doing to
Yes.
stop it from becoming AGI?
We don't build big enough models for AGI or emergence.
On purpose.
On purpose. So I held back release of my image models. Like, we could train much bigger language models, but we choose not to. So we're a fast follower on language models. We try not to push the boundaries, and we're focusing on the edge. Not general purpose models, but models that can transform your private data. So a different focus. Image models as well. We could have much better image models if we just went big. We're focusing on what can work on a smartphone, so we can give it to all the kids in Africa and Asia and other things like that, where we can transform your private data at a very low cost of inference. So the objective function is augmentation versus generalization, and that's different to most of the other people that are pushing the boundaries here. But I think the nuke thing is, it's good as bad. I really want to see that movie Oppenheimer. I think it just came out. Barbie and then Oppenheimer, or Oppenheimer and then Barbie. I have to decide that.
Tough call.
But like, what if we'd put nukes on the bottom of the rockets? We'll probably be at Mars by now. General purpose technology, I think, is quite something. And again, it can warm up entire places, and it's the cleanest energy we have. So I think it is dual purpose, but so is cryptography, right? Think about all the battles around the early stage of the internet. The bad guys are going to use cryptography, so don't use it. Imagine a world if there was no cryptography right now. But it's tough to get parallels to this because it's just it's an immediate technology, because again, you go to Dream Studio, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, any of the DALL-E, GPT-4, you can just use it. It's not just you that can use it, it's your grandma that can use it. We've never seen as easy to use technology as this, and as easy to implement technology. So if you want to create an integration into OpenAI's GPT-4, ChatGPT, you just write a description of the integration and it programs it itself. It would have taken days before. We've not seen a technology like this that can be implemented to an existing base as quickly as this can happen, and that fundamentally changes the structure of society. And so my thing was embed guardrails, embed standards, make it predictable, make it boring. That's why I called it stability. And it's not easy. But again, I want to have the transparency on how these things are done, because then you've got all these other models that you don't know what the data is. They're completely opaque, these giant models, and ours are transparent. And again, I think it's Linux, Windows, Android, iOS. There will be both. But at least I can do what I can do, and my team can do what we can do.
I've heard you say that one of the reasons that you named the company Stability, not just because it's the boring stalwart, but that you thought that it could bring stability to the global order.
Yeah, I think if you give the same education tablets to every child in the world that's constantly learning, adapting, and going around, if you upgrade the healthcare systems with the same underlying models, the same architecture to transform all the regulated industries, governments, and other things, and you give back the control of that to the people, you suddenly have a unified architecture that can enable us to coordinate better, because you've got the same information architecture across the world for all of these sectors. And that's a complex hierarchical system. Herb Simon was a theorist who kind of pushed this through, in that the way we coordinate as humans in groups is we coordinate at a local level, and then sometimes we can tell better stories that we suddenly get to the human colossus, and we got a COVID vaccine, or we figure out nuclear power, or all these kind of things. So I was like, if I can standardize the building blocks on which society transforms and give it to the world, then I don't think there's a single problem we can't solve. Like, you got excited earlier about your own personal kind of AI that could go into that. What if you combine that with an AI that knows everything about climate or everything about, nuclear power or everything about multiple sclerosis? You break down the barriers for information, for knowledge, and there's no problem you can't solve. Because it may be that to solve the problem of AI impacting our society, we need AI to figure out that problem, to bring together the brightest minds.
Yeah.
Because we're not doing a very good job ourselves. Like you mentioned John Nash earlier, Nash equilibria, game theory, and mechanism design. On the one hand is our own personal AIs guiding us, our co-pilots for life. But then there's pilots, which are AIs that can coordinate all the co-pilots. And that can allow us to tell bigger stories and unify better to achieve massive outcomes.
Talk to me about you've mentioned story like that several times. What do you mean by story, better stories, unifying stories? What does that mean?
So there's the story of America. And what is the story of America? It was kind of like freedom, liberty, kind of all these things. It was the American dream, like a progress thing. It's people believe in, because to be happy, you need to do something you're good at, something you like, and where you believe you're measurably adding value, and the other party does as well. In the middle of that, that's the Japanese concept. Ikigai is happiness. One of the concerns that you have is that people won't feel the forward motion anymore. They'll be stuck, and they'll feel a sense of emptiness. Will they turn to religion? Will they turn to political parties? Something will fill that gap and void. And those are the stories that allow us to scale as a society, because when we started, we were oral. We had our families, we had our tribes. And then we formed countries, we formed organizations. And so we are the stories that make us up. We identify as a Republican, we identify as a Barbie lover, we identify, as a nuclear scientist, or the schools that we went to. But it's difficult, especially in a time of polarization, to try and bridge those stories. Because ultimately, there's a single story, which is we're all human. But all wars are based on the lie that we're not all human. Because killing each other is a ridiculous violation of the story that we're human. But again, we lose sight of that. It's difficult to unify people. Actually, one of the examples I give of this is Google, everyone is smart. Google hires smart people. They did a study to see what identified smart top performing teams for lower performing teams. It was called Project Aristotle. And they came down to two things: a unified mission and story, especially one that's like you have a crunch period and then you all band together, just like Marines also are forced through hazing, etc. And then psychological safety, the ability to say something without fear of reproach. Like they can say the idea is stupid, but not that you're stupid. And if you think about the teams you've had, they have a shared story, a shared narrative, a cohesion, and then that level of psychological safety. Or if it's not creative, they blooming well listen to instructions, right? So you got a few different ones around that. So that's what I mean by stories, and the stories are context, and context is what these models capture.
All right, let me paint a troubling scenario for you based on that idea of these stories. There are oftentimes things that in isolation are amazing, but they come together in a way that, again, maybe in the long arc actually are amazing and actually do yield what we want them to yield. But we will go through a period where the long arc of history cares not for the individual.
Yeah.
So I think that what's going on with AI, what's going on with crypto may be one of those moments. So as the individual becomes more sovereign, and you have a monetary system that bypasses the government. When I first started learning about what money really was, and I sat across from Robert Breedlove, and he started describing why he liked Bitcoin, what the whole idea of the sovereign individual was, I realized you understand that you're making the government an enemy, or certainly they are no longer powerful. Certainly no longer as powerful, and that they're not going to go quietly. They're not just going to let go of that. And so if I have an AI, if I have a team of AIs, 1,000 AIs that are able to guide me far better than any government could ever hope to guide me, that they're giving me real-time data based on whatever it is that I'm trying to figure out in that moment. They're giving me real-time data, extreme intelligence. Oh, and by the way, the currency that I use is Bitcoin. And so I'm not even tied to a fiat currency. It's a global standard. Do you not see the inevitability of the disintegration of governments?
No, I think that Bitcoin and other things, they have a value in certain areas, but I think it's very difficult for most people to understand that value. And most people don't want that value. Most people are quite happy in their communities and they just want to get on with life. I think that governments are ultimately, one definition is the entity with a monopoly on political violence. And money itself is a story. Like a dollar is just an intermediation point that we all commonly agree has value because it's backed by taxes, which are backed by the army and military might. You don't pay your taxes, you're going to get in trouble, right? I think it's difficult for Bitcoin to replace that unless you see a massive deterioration in the ability of the government to be the political violence thing. This comes down to your thing of civil war. It comes down to massive, ridiculous disruption, hyperinflation or otherwise, that just basically takes down a society. I think that's a very dangerous thing. I think most people in the world don't want that. Instead, what happens is when you have disruptions, you have Hayek had a really great book, The Road to Serfdom. And there's an illustrated version of that way back in the 1940s about bringing in the strongman. Like you look at something like the US election or you look at Brexit, what were they? They were referenda. That's how the parties deconstructed it. Are you happy with the way things are? No, let's make a change. And so that's why I think Trump and others kind of get elected. And I think that's what we'll see as well, because the systems are quite resilient. And the nature of a change to go to a global monetary system like that, especially when some people will get enriched more than others because of the seniorage of Bitcoin and it's not stable, I just struggle seeing that happening.
Have you read the book Infomocracy?
No.
All right, so this is all tied to the thing that I think I worry most about is hyperfragmentation.
Yeah.
I was talking about it earlier. So in the book Infomocracy, to your point about people are happy in their communities, and Balaji has an idea around this that he calls the network state.
Yeah.
That basically we're going to reach a point where when money is no longer controlled by the government, when your money cannot be inflated away, when it's true sound money, what you'll see is people will begin to aggregate. Now, Balaji thinks that it is not going to be tied to geography. I have a bit of a harder time with that. I think that there is still going to be a geography component. That's where Infomocracy comes in. And that book, basically, they're in a hyper-connected digital world where, and I can't remember if they deal with digital currency or not. Let's say that they do. That basically things will fragment down into the neighborhood. And so neighborhoods become like states or countries where they have their own rules and laws. And that sounded like a hellscape to me, because you just passing from one neighborhood to the next, like different rules would apply and your phone would ding and it would update you on like, this is what you can do in this space. You think that's a
it's
non-starter.
complicated. People don't want complicated. They just want to get on with life. They want to see what's next on TV. You know, I think that, again, we're relatively hyper intellectual, you know, and we think about things a lot of people don't, because people have their basic needs in life, and it's question of, are these being met or not? And if they're not being met, then you have action and you get extreme. And again, it's, can the society meet the needs of the majority of people? Can it offer advancement? Can it offer meaning? And the hyperfragmentation, as you said, it sounds like a hellscape. It's just too complicated. And again, this is something we saw in Web3 as well. People just overcomplicated things, because they didn't really understand people, maybe. And I think, you know, it's going to be interesting to see how it evolves, the hyper-personalization versus the bigger stories, the translations versus otherwise. But I find it, again, difficult to see how you get cross-geography. Actually, thinking about that, one of the things that probably is going to be interesting is what are the new cults, religions, and political movements of the next 5 to 10 years that are hyper-organized utilizing AI and hyper-persuasive.
Or started by AI.
Started by AI. You know, like, look at ISIS. They were probably the most disruptive startup in the world at one point. They borrowed a lot of these things. What does an AI-enhanced movement look like? And it can be negative. It can be positive. Someone's going to take this and run with it. And that's going to organize people around the world. And it's going to be, again, echoey. And it could be techno-utopian. It could be Luddite, ironically, even with this. Political parties will change. Religions will change. Cults will change. And it really amplifies the power of the controller of this, who tells the story. And I'm not sure, I haven't really thought about that, and I'm thinking about it now because you're talking about hyper-personalization, where I think this is the flip side of it. I mean, this is Isaiah Berlin's conceptualization of positive and negative liberty. So positive liberty is the freedom to believe in isms. Fascism, communism, Islamism, or kind of whatever, right? Whereas negative liberty was the freedom from being told what to do. And so his thing was like positive ones are bad because they form these massive movements and then they tend to kill people because you have the Girardian thing of mimetic theory where you want what other people want and then there's a scapegoat. Whereas negative liberty is the freedom from being told what to do. And that led to laissez-faire capitalism and this consumerism that we saw around the world. And so maybe as people lose meaning, they'll turn back to religion. There'll be new religions. There'll be new political movements. And we're not sure what those will be, but they could spread faster than anything we've ever seen. And so that's probably something to watch out for within that 5-year period that you're talking about. And I think that relates to this network state concept and other things. But for the people that get engaged by this, and again, we see that's largely the youth. So on the one hand, you have the youth with their AI girlfriends. On the other hand, you have the youths that want to believe in something bigger to fill the void. And who's going to step in?
Yeah. And I think that there is something about not having a shared narrative that really makes me nervous. So Yuval Noah Harari talks a lot about, hey, the thing that makes humans so intriguing is that we're not only able to organize in these really large numbers, but unlike ants that have to do it in a very strict way, we can do it in a very flexible way, but we do it through these shared narratives. Now, for a long time, religion served as the thing that gave people a shared narrative. But as religion breaks apart and we get into this hyper-personalization and it all begins to fragment, then you mix that with this idea that I heard from Jordan Peterson. I'm almost certain he heard it from somebody else, but this idea that everybody has to go through a messianic phase where they want to really contribute to the world. They want to feel like they matter. And they begin glomming on to all manner of things that seem good in the abstract, like climate change. But when you are glomming on to climate change as your way to save the world, you begin to get into the realm of, well, it's okay if we have to break some eggs to make the omelet.
Utilitarianism, yeah.
Yeah. And it rapidly devolves into Mao.
Well,
So how do we, you said you haven't really thought about this, but I'm super curious, at least in real time, how you think about the idea of do we need to give people a unifying narrative? And if so, how do we go about it?
We need to tell better, more positive stories about the future. And these are the stories of universal education, universal healthcare, solving the mysteries of the universe and others. So I've got a lot of, because that's hope for humanity, right? And a lot of the things that we see are dystopias because you're looking at the tiger, you're spotting AI is the tiger in the bush. And it's difficult to ride a tiger, but maybe that's a kind of cool picture that we can make in Stable Diffusion in 2 seconds, right? Because it does have this duality of potential outcomes, and maybe it's actually all of them. So what are the stories that we should tell? And I think this is, again, part of the crisis of what is the American identity? What is the American story today? Whereby you've gone through many cycles. What do Americans believe in? What does America want it to be? I'm not sure what Americans want America to be. I'm not sure what Chinese people want China to be. I'm not sure what people want. And I think that it's difficult to think about what is your objective function, how are you going to measure your life and other things. Religion filled a lot of those kind of things, but it still does. Religion hasn't gone away. Half the world is religious, right? More probably. Like you actually look at the numbers, sure, it decreases in certain areas, particularly somewhere like America, but it's going strong around the rest of the world. And it's just growing because they have more kids than non-religious people. Maybe that fills the gap, but how will religion transform with this technology? I mean,
let me ask, do you think that the countries with religion will be the ones that propagate into the future because they have a better shared story?
Well, no, because they propagate literally. They procreate.
Even if that's how the story ends up pushing them forward.
I think it could be, but then, what is the nature of Christianity with AI or Islam with AI? Islam's actually the one that's most affected by AI.
Why?
So Christianity, and Shia Islam, you've got popes, you've got Protestantism, you've got this, every single one has their own structure. Sunni Islam is based on interpretation of texts, with the interpretation having ceased around about the 16th century because the text became too complex. What happens when you apply AI to that? And the texts are interpretable by anyone with all the context and nuance. And there's no centralized authority in Sunni Islam, which is like 1 billion people. That's going to be very interesting. What does that do to Protestantism? Where you don't have necessarily a pope. What does religion look like when all of a sudden you have a branch that is AI enhanced to interpret texts and to tell stories that are resonant and better? Oh gosh, there's a lot to think about there, right?
Does AI become a god?
Well, some people are trying to build an AI god. That is AGI. You look at the statements of people trying to build AGI, they're trying to build God. because it will bring us utopia or kill us all. This sounds very, again, classical, right? And they have fervor. They genuinely believe that they are going to save the world or destroy it. Yeah, we got back to the dark stuff, didn't we? Yeah.
That's a trip.
Remake Game of Thrones season 8. You know, like, come on, let's do it. Let's bring this technology for cool stuff. Make the Oasis in Ready Player One minus the microtransactions and whiny teenagers. Stuff like that.
That part I actually am working on.
There we go.
All right. So talk to a young person out there right now. They're terrified. They wanna be future proofed. What do they do? How does somebody right now future proof themselves?
They just throw themselves into this area. There are so few people actually doing it that if you go into this area with all your might and curiosity and a generally open mind, you can actually have an effect on the future. Because everyone in your community will be using this. Everyone that you know will be using it. If you're someone that listens to this podcast, again, maybe not the people without internet, but you don't know those people, you know? And so you become a Schelling point. You become the expert in this area ahead of everyone. Because what happens is that anyone who gets into it now will have almost an unassailable advantage of people who come later. It's a kind of seniorage thing, right? Because you'll see it at the start. It is the start of the biggest change, I think, that we've ever seen. And again, think about what you're doing when you're typing in and seeing that, and think about 1 million of these things working. That even better. It's unavoidable. So I'd say you just have to get into it. You have to get passionate. You have to think about the bad stuff, but is that really your responsibility, right? I think it is, but focus on the good stuff and focus on the potential of what happens when this scales to make real positive change. It can be to your pocket, it can be to your community, it can be to your life, because it does affect everyone that you know. So I'd go with a positive mindset, leave it to boring old guys like us to think about all the doom scenarios.
Fair enough. Emad, where can people follow you?
I suppose my Twitter, Emad Mostaque, follow Stability AI as well. Yeah, that's kind of the main mouthpiece.
I love it. All right, everybody, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe and deploy some AI in your life. And until next time, my friends, be legendary. Take care. Peace. To learn more about artificial intelligence, check out this episode with Mo Gadot.
We've never created a nuclear weapon that can create nuclear weapons. The artificial intelligences that we're building are capable of creating other artificial intelligences. As a matter of fact, they're encouraged to create other artificial intelligence.